My name is Madeline, 33 years old, and my mother literally tore my wedding invitation to shreds because she thought I was trying to ruin my sister's aesthetic. She looked me dead in the eye and threw the pieces into the trash, pampering her golden daughter and spoiling her like a princess while treating me like dirt. They thought I was a broke outcast, planning a cheap courthouse ceremony. But when they eventually saw me walk down the aisle at a $50 million estate broadcast nationwide on live television, their faces completely froze. They frantically tried to contact me begging for a second chance. My reply to them was just 3 words: too late now. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth and tried to keep you at the bottom. The sharp, sickening sound of thick cardstock being ripped in half echoed through the kitchen. I stood completely still, watching my mother Deanna grip the heavy ivory paper of my wedding invitation. The gold foil lettering caught the afternoon light just before she tore it again, reducing months of careful planning into jagged little pieces. She did not even blink. She just opened her perfectly manicured hand and let the pieces flutter directly into the stainless steel trash can next to the large granite island. "Are you completely out of your mind, Madeline?" Deanna hissed, her face flushed with indignation as she leaned across the countertop. "You schedule your little courthouse stunt the exact same month as Melanie's wedding. You are purposely trying to ruin her moment, just like you always do. You just could not stand the thought of your sister getting all the attention for once, could you?" I looked from the trash can to my younger sister Melanie, who was lounging on the expensive living room sofa. At 29, she had perfected the art of playing the helpless victim, while simultaneously looking down on everyone else in her orbit. She was casually buffing her nails, admiring the massive diamond engagement ring on her finger. She acted as if she were royalty holding court in our sprawling suburban Connecticut home, a house I knew was secretly drowning in 3 different mortgages. "It is honestly so pathetic, Maddie," Melanie chimed in, not even bothering to look up from her makeshift salon treatment. "You know perfectly well that my fiancé is a top-tier corporate litigator. Our wedding is going to be a high society event. We have state senators and senior law partners on the guest list, and you are going to drag the family name through the mud by getting married in some dingy municipal building with a guy nobody in this family has even met. It is completely embarrassing." I kept my voice perfectly level, refusing to give them the explosive reaction they were so desperately trying to provoke. "I am not ruining anything, Deanna," I replied calmly, deliberately, using her first name to establish the boundary between us. "I am simply getting married. And considering I have not asked you or Dad for a single dime to fund my life since I moved out, you do not get a say in my timeline, my venue, or my relationship." Deanna scoffed loudly, crossing her arms over her cashmere sweater. "Oh, here we go again. The independent woman's speech. You are so ungrateful. We gave you a roof over your head and a perfect childhood. You should be thrilled we even let you sit at this table after how distant you have been." A perfect childhood. I laughed, a short, bitter sound that seemed to bounce off the pristine white cabinets. "Did you forget why I left this house the second I turned 18? You drained my entire college savings account. The money I spent 4 years working double shifts after school to save. You took all of it just to buy Melanie a brand new luxury car for her sweet 16 because she threw a massive tantrum about wanting to look rich in front of her high school friends. You lost the right to parent me or have an opinion on my life choices 15 years ago." Melanie rolled her eyes, dramatically sighing as she stood up and walked into the kitchen to pour herself a glass of sparkling water. "You are always so dramatic and obsessed with the past. Family shares resources, Maddie. I needed a reliable car for my social standing, and you were book smart enough to just get student loans. You should be thanking Mom. She taught you how to be self-sufficient instead of relying on handouts like a leech." The sheer delusion in her voice was almost impressive. She was standing in a house financed by massive debt, wearing designer clothes she could not afford, lecturing me about self-sufficiency. I was an executive media producer with a massive net worth, engaged to the heir of a $1 billion real estate empire, and she still thought I was the struggling, pathetic scapegoat of the family. If stealing my hard-earned money was a lesson in self-sufficiency, then consider me fully educated, I said, grabbing my purse from the counter. which is exactly why my wedding has nothing to do with yours. Do not worry, Melanie. My dingy little ceremony will not cross paths with your high society spectacle. Suddenly, the sweep of bright LED headlights flashed across the large kitchen windows. The low, smooth hum of a heavy luxury sedan pulling into the driveway broke the tense, suffocating silence in the room. Melanie glanced out the window, and her entire demeanor shifted in a fraction of a second. The haughty, arrogant smirk melted off her face, replaced by sheer, wide-eyed panic. The color drained from her cheeks. "Mom, hide that right now!" Melanie hissed, her voice trembling as she pointed frantically at the trash can. "Pick up those pieces. Malik is here. He is parking the car." Deanna gasped, immediately dropping to her knees on the hardwood floor. The woman who had just proudly destroyed my invitation was now scrambling, sweeping the torn pieces of gold-foiled paper out of the trash, shoving them underneath a thick stack of utility bills on the counter. Melanie rushed over to me, grabbing my arm with a desperate grip. Her eyes were pleading, but her tone was a venomous threat. "Do not say a single word about this to him, Madeline. Do you understand me? He thinks we are a close, supportive family. Malik is a highly principled man, and if you ruin my relationship with a partner from the city's biggest law firm just because you are bitter and jealous, I swear I will make your life a living hell." I looked down at her hand gripping my jacket, then back up to her terrified, hypocritical face. I gently peeled her fingers off my arm, a slow, knowing smile spreading across my face. "I would not dream of ruining your perfect illusion, Melanie. I want Malik to see exactly who he is marrying." The sound of a key turning in the heavy oak front door echoed through the hallway. Confident footsteps stepped into the foyer. I stood my ground, waiting for the golden child's perfect facade to face its first real test. Malik Banks walked into the kitchen, his presence instantly shifting the gravity in the room. At 34 years old, he possessed the sharp, uncompromising aura of a man who commanded high-stakes corporate courtrooms. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his posture immaculate, his expression analytical and calm. As a highly successful African-American corporate litigator, Malik had built his entire professional reputation on uncovering hidden facts, dissecting complex evidence, and seeing straight through people's nonsense. Yet he was currently completely blind to the masterclass in psychological manipulation happening right inside his future in-law's house. The transformation in my mother and sister gave me sheer whiplash. The venomous snarls vanished into thin air. Melanie practically sprinted across the granite kitchen island, her face suddenly the picture of pure, innocent joy, though her eyes remained wide with a frantic underlying panic. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his chest, playing the role of the exhausted but loving fiancé to absolute perfection. "Baby, you are home early," Melanie cooed, her voice jumping up 2 octaves into a sickeningly sweet register that she only used when she wanted something expensive. Deanna immediately busied herself at the counter, purposely sliding a large stack of mail and glossy magazines directly over the rim of the stainless steel trash can to hide the torn pieces of my gold-foiled wedding invitation. Malik smiled warmly, kissing Melanie's forehead, but his sharp eyes quickly caught the lingering tension in the room. The air was thick, vibrating with the bitter argument he had just interrupted. He looked over at me standing near the island with my purse slung over my shoulder, completely unbothered by their sudden theatrical performance. "Madeline, it is good to see you," Malik said, his deep voice friendly but cautious. "I thought you were stuck in New York working behind the scenes this weekend." Before I could even open my mouth to respond, Melanie tightened her grip on his suit jacket and let out a soft theatrical sigh. She looked up at him with wide, watery eyes. "Maddie just stopped by for a minute, Malik. We were actually just talking about the wedding arrangements. I am trying so hard to include her in the bridal party, but she is just making it so difficult for everyone." Malik frowned slightly, his protective instinct kicking in. He gently rubbed Melanie's back. "Difficult how?" "We want you there, Madeline. You are her only sister. We want you involved in our special day." Deanna spun around from the counter, her face arranged in a flawless mask of maternal sorrow. "Oh, Malik, you know how deep sibling rivalry can run. Madeline is just feeling a little left out and insecure because she is planning her own small ceremony at the municipal courthouse. She is upset that Melanie's wedding is getting so much attention from the country club crowd. We are just asking her to be a supportive older sister instead of acting out of spite and jealousy. I stood there in complete silence, genuinely marveling at the audacity. They were gaslighting me right in front of the man they were actively trying to scam. They were painting me as the bitter, broke older sister who could not handle the golden child's monumental success. They were banking on the fact that I would keep my mouth shut to avoid making a scene, trapping me in their false narrative. Deanna took a calculated step toward me. Her eyes flashed with a vicious, silent threat, but her voice remained sugary sweet for Malik's benefit. In fact, Madeline, since you are being so uncooperative with the planning committee, we think it is only fair that you contribute financially to the floral budget. It is the absolute least you can do to prove your loyalty to this family after everything we have sacrificed to raise you. I raised an eyebrow, my expression utterly flat. The floral budget. Yes, Deanna said firmly, stepping closer so her back was completely to Malik, allowing her to glare at me with pure hatred. $15,000. That is your share of the expenses. Consider it a peace offering to your sister. You write that check by tomorrow morning, and we will forget this entire ugly, jealous phase of yours. If you refuse to support your own blood, then I am afraid you are no longer welcome on this property, and you certainly will not be invited to the ceremony. Malik shifted uncomfortably, clearly taken aback by the aggressive financial demand. He held up a hand to intervene. Deanna, hold on. I can cover the floral arrangements. Madeline does not need to pay $15,000 if she does not have it. I know things are tight for her right now. Things are tight for her. The words echoed in my mind. That is what Melanie had told him. She had painted me as a financial disaster to make herself look like the wealthy, successful one in the family. She had fabricated an entire narrative about my life, my career, and my bank account to boost her own societal status in his eyes. I looked at Malik. Truly looked at him. He was a highly intelligent man, a good man currently wrapped around the finger of a textbook narcissist. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not defend myself against their absurd claims of jealousy or my supposed financial ruin. I simply adjusted my coat, gripped my car keys, and offered a calm, steady smile that made Melanie visibly flinch. "Keep your money, Malik," I said, my voice cutting through the thick kitchen tension like a diamond blade. "And Deanna, do not worry about banning me from the property. I have zero interest in pretending we are a happy, functional family for the sake of your neighborhood reputation." I turned to walk away, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. But I paused right at the threshold of the kitchen archway. I looked back over my shoulder, locking eyes directly with Malik. He was watching me intently, his analytical mind clearly struggling to process the glaring disconnect between the bitter, impoverished sister Melanie had described and the calm, unbothered woman standing before him. "Congratulations on the engagement, Malik," I said smoothly, letting the words hang in the air for a fraction of a second. "I really do hope your due diligence in the courtroom is a lot better than it is in your personal life, because right now you are missing a lot of fine print." I turned on my heel and walked out the front door, letting the heavy oak slam shut behind me. As I walked down the driveway toward my car, I could already hear the faint, high-pitched sound of Melanie's voice through the window, desperately launching into a frantic explanation to perform damage control. She was terrified, and she had every right to be. I slid into the leather seat of my car, the engine purring to life as I backed out of the driveway. I did not look back at the house. The drive back to New York was supposed to be quiet, a chance to decompress from the sheer toxicity of my family. I merged onto Interstate 95, the city skyline a distant promise of sanity. My phone vibrated in the center console. The dashboard display lit up with an incoming call from Richard Ross. My father. I let it ring 3 times, watching the digital letters flash before tapping the screen to answer. I expected yelling. Instead, I got the chilling, authoritative tone he always used when he was trying to put me in my place. "Madeline, you have severely crossed the line today. he began, not bothering with a greeting or asking if I was safely on the highway. Your mother is in tears, and Melanie is having a panic attack in the guest bathroom. You owe them both a massive apology. I owe them nothing, Richard, I replied, keeping my eyes locked on the road ahead. If Melanie is having a panic attack, it is because she realized she cannot keep lying to the man she is trying to marry. Malik is a smart attorney. He is going to start asking questions she cannot answer. You listen to me right now, he snapped, his voice rising in volume, echoing through my car speakers. You are not going to ruin your sister's big moment because you are holding on to some petty childhood grudge. You are going to call the courthouse tomorrow morning. You are going to cancel whatever pathetic little ceremony you have planned, and you are going to show up to Melanie's wedding with a smile on your face and a check for her floral arrangements. If you refuse to do this, I will call my attorney first thing Monday. I will completely cut you out of my will. You will not see a single dime of family money, and you will forfeit any claim to the Connecticut estate. Do I make myself perfectly clear? For a moment, the only sound in the car was the hum of my tires on the asphalt. Years ago, that threat would have terrified me. When I was younger, the idea of being officially disowned, of losing my place in the family lineage, felt like a death sentence. But sitting in my luxury car, knowing the empire I had built with my own two hands, the threat sounded like a pathetic joke. I threw my head back and let out a genuine, unburdened laugh. Are you laughing at me? Richard demanded, his voice thick with rage and disbelief. I am laughing at the sheer absurdity of your threat, I said, my tone turning ice cold. Cut me out of the will. Oh, no, Richard. Whatever will I do without my inheritance? Let us talk about this precious Connecticut estate you are holding over my head. You mean the house on Elmridge Lane? The one that currently has 3 secret mortgages stacked against it? The one where the property taxes are 6 months past due. Silence on the other end. A heavy, suffocating silence. Did you really think I did not know? I continued, pressing the advantage, enjoying the sudden shift in power. I have friends in finance, Richard. I know exactly how much debt you are swimming in. You leveraged that house to the absolute brink to pay for Melanie's designer bags, her luxury cars, and your country club membership fees. There is no inheritance. That estate belongs to the bank. So go ahead, write me out of the will. You would be doing me a massive favor by not leaving me your catastrophic financial mess. You disrespectful little brat, he hissed, his composure entirely shattered. The authoritative patriarch act dropped, completely revealing the desperate, cornered man underneath. You have no idea what you are talking about. You know nothing about my finances. You are dead to me. Do you hear me? Dead to me. The line went dead. He hung up. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. They had drawn their lines in the sand. They wanted to play a game of status, wealth, and public perception. They had no idea they were stepping into a war they had already lost. I picked my phone back up and hit speed dial. It rang exactly once before a deep, calm voice answered. Hey, beautiful, Preston said, the background noise of his high-rise office filtering through the speaker. I thought you were going to be trapped in suburbia for another hour. I left early, I said, my voice steady, but carrying an unmistakable edge. Preston, we need to talk about the wedding broadcast. Preston Beaumont was the heir to a venture capital and real estate empire that spanned 3 continents. He was also the only man who had ever truly seen me matching my ambition and fiercely protecting my peace. We had been planning our wedding at his family's $50 million estate in Newport, Rhode Island. A major television network, the very same one where I held a massive equity stake and served as an executive producer, had approached us about broadcasting the event live. It was pitched as the billionaire wedding of the decade. Up until today, I had been hesitant, wanting to keep parts of our day private. What about the broadcast? Preston asked, instantly picking up on my tone. Did they do something? They demanded I pay $15,000 for Melanie's flowers, threatened to ban me from the property. And Richard just tried to blackmail me with a house the bank practically owns, I explained rapidly. Melanie is telling Malik I am broke, jealous, and having a cheap courthouse wedding because I cannot handle her high society success. Preston let out a low, dangerous chuckle. Is that so? Well, we can certainly correct the narrative. What do you need? Exactly, I said, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. I am done holding back to protect their fragile egos. I want you to call the network executives, accelerate the broadcast contracts, give them full exclusive rights. I want the drones, the helicopter coverage, the A-list, guest list, everything on camera. I want them to film the custom $250,000 dress. I want the governors and the Wall Street executives front and center. They want to act like I do not exist, Preston. Let us make sure they cannot look anywhere without seeing me. Consider it done, Preston replied smoothly, the sound of him typing on his keyboard echoing in the background. The network is going to love this. We will have the contracts finalized and signed by tomorrow morning. Are you okay, Madeline? I looked through the windshield, watching the brilliant towering skyline of Manhattan finally come into view against the sky. I am better than okay. I smiled. I am finally giving them exactly what they asked for. The very next afternoon, my phone lit up with a text message from Deanna. It was a bizarre, overly sweet invitation claiming that she and Melanie wanted to come into the city to take me out for lunch. They said they wanted to clear the air, apologize for the tension, and put the wedding drama behind us. I knew instantly it was a trap. My family never apologized unless they were setting the stage to ask for something substantial. But curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet them at an outrageously expensive exclusive French restaurant in the heart of Manhattan, known for its mandatory tasting menus and sky-high prices. When I arrived, the hostess escorted me to a secluded corner booth. Deanna and Melanie were already seated looking entirely out of place, despite their best efforts to dress in what they considered Manhattan chic. They had already ordered a bottle of vintage champagne that I knew cost at least $800. The table was littered with empty oyster shells and caviar blinis. They were treating this lunch like a lottery win, and I knew exactly who they expected to pay the taxes on it. "Madeline, darling," Deanna cooed as I slid into the leather booth. "You look so tired. City life must be draining you." We went ahead and ordered the Chef Grand tasting menu for all of us. It is a celebration of family unity. I glanced at the menu. The grand tasting was $500 per person, not including the wine pairings they were eagerly throwing back. I ordered a simple sparkling water and sat back waiting for the performance to reach its inevitable climax. We made small talk through the first 3 courses. Melanie prattled on about her wedding colors, complaining about how hard it was to find the right shade of ivory for her imported silk napkins. I merely nodded, keeping my expressions neutral. It was not until the waiter cleared our plates from the duck confit course that the real reason for this expensive ambush finally revealed itself. Melanie reached into her oversized designer bag, a bag I knew Deanna had put on a high-interest credit card, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She slid it across the pristine white tablecloth toward me. "So we have a small favor to ask, Melanie," said her voice dropping into that sickly sweet tone she used when she wanted to manipulate a situation. Malik and I were looking at real estate for our future home. You know how it is, a man of his stature in the legal field cannot just live in some cookie-cutter suburban subdivision. He needs an estate, a custom build. I stared at the envelope, then back up at her. "And what does Malik's imaginary estate have to do with me?" Deanna leaned forward, folding her hands together. "We are talking about your grandfather's vacant plot of land up in Westchester, the 10-acre property he left to both of you. It is just sitting there collecting weeds. Melanie and Malik want to build their dream house on it. All you have to do is sign this waiver releasing your 50% share of the deed over to Melanie. It is just a formality, really." I slowly opened the envelope and pulled out the legal document. It was a heavily weighted quitclaim deed drafted by some cheap online legal service, essentially stripping me of my inheritance for zero compensation. They wanted me to just hand over 5 acres of prime Westchester real estate so Melanie could play wealthy housewife. "You want me to sign away my half of grandfather's land?" I said, making sure I spoke loudly and clearly enough for the neighboring tables to catch the sheer audacity of the request. "For free." "Do not be greedy, Madeline." Deanna hissed, her fake smile straining at the edges. "You live in an apartment. You do not need land. Melanie is marrying a prominent attorney. They need the space to entertain clients and host charity galas. It is the right thing to do for the family's image. You owe this to your sister after the stress you caused yesterday. I looked at the document again, running my finger over the signature line. A genuine smile broke across my face. It was not a smile of defeat, but one of pure, unadulterated amusement. I slid the paperwork right back across the table, watching it bump into Melanie's half-empty wine glass. "I cannot sign that," I said simply. Melanie slammed her hand down on the table, abandoning the sweet fiancé act entirely. "Why not? Are you seriously that selfish? You are practically broke, Madeline. What are you going to do with 10 acres of dirt? Just sign the paper so Malik and I can start breaking ground." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. "Because I cannot legally sign away something that is currently tied up in a massive commercial zoning project, Melanie. That land is not a vacant lot of weeds anymore. 6 months ago, I leased my 50% of the development rights to Beaumont Enterprises. They are building a luxury eco-resort on it. Your half is currently being evaluated for eminent domain access roads because you ignored all the city council letters sent to your address last year." Melanie froze. Deanna's jaw practically unhinged. "Beaumont Enterprises!" Melanie scoffed, letting out a loud mocking laugh. "Are you completely delusional? Do you even know who they are? That is a billion-dollar corporation. They do not do business with low-level event planners." "You are pathetic, Maddie. You are literally making up imaginary business deals with billionaires just to hold on to a piece of dirt out of pure spite. You are going to regret this." Madeline Deanna threatened, her face turning a mottled shade of red. "You are going to pay for this meal, and then you are going to call my lawyer and sign that deed, or so help me." I did not argue. I did not try to convince them. Some people are so committed to their ignorance that trying to educate them is just a waste of breath. I reached into my purse and pulled out my wallet. I did a quick mental calculation of my sparkling water and the one appetizer I had touched. I pulled out a crisp $100 bill and a 50, placing them neatly on the table. "That covers my water and my salad, plus a generous 20% tip for the waiter," I said, standing up and smoothing out my coat. Melanie looked at the cash, then at the incoming waiter carrying a silver tray with a massive Wagyu steak and another bottle of champagne. "Wait, what are you doing?" she demanded, her voice spiking in panic. "The bill is going to be over $2,000. You have to pay for this. You are the older sister. Enjoy the grand tasting menu." I smiled, looking down at their horrified faces. "I hear the Wagyu is spectacular. And good luck explaining to Malik why you cannot build a mansion on land that is currently being paved for a resort driveway." I turned and walked out of the restaurant, ignoring Deanna shouting my name. I stepped out into the crisp Manhattan air, leaving them utterly stranded with a bill they could not afford, and a lie that was rapidly catching up to them. Back at the restaurant, panic had immediately set in for my mother and sister. The waiter had presented a bill for over $2,000, and neither of them had the funds to cover it. In a moment of pure desperation, Melanie had been forced to pull out a backup credit card Malik had given her for wedding emergencies only. She swiped it, knowing full well that a massive charge at a Manhattan fine dining establishment was going to trigger a fraud alert on his phone. When the alert hit Malik's phone, he called her immediately. Melanie had to step out onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk, fake crying, claiming that Deanna had a sudden medical emergency at the restaurant, and the astronomical bill was actually for an out-of-network private clinic consultation they had to rush to. It was a pathetic, flimsy lie, but Malik, being a decent man who trusted his future wife, accepted it for the moment. However, Melanie knew his analytical mind would eventually ask for receipts. She was backed into a dangerous corner, and she blamed me entirely for putting her there. By the time she returned to the Connecticut house, Melanie was practically vibrating with rage. She stormed up to her childhood bedroom, slammed the door, and opened her laptop. If she was going to go down, she was determined to drag me down with her. She needed leverage. She needed to find something, anything that could destroy my reputation and force me to come crawling back to the family for financial help. Because she still genuinely believed my cover story, that I was just a low-level event coordinator for a media company, she started digging through vendor registries, public event permits, and corporate industry directories. She typed my name into search engine after search engine, obsessively clicking through pages of search results. It did not take long for her to stumble upon something massive. She found a public municipal permit filed for a private high-security event taking place in Newport, Rhode Island. Her eyes widened as she clicked on the venue details. It was a legendary oceanfront estate, a historic mansion valued at over $50 million. The photos online showed sweeping marble terraces, private beaches, and manicured gardens that looked like they belonged to European royalty. And right there, listed on the municipal filing as the primary point of contact and lead director, was my name, Madeline Ross. Instead of realizing the obvious truth, that I was the bride hosting the event, her narcissistic brain immediately jumped to the most condescending conclusion possible. She assumed I had been hired as the event coordinator. She thought I was nothing more than the hired help, a glorified party planner, fetching coffee, yelling at florists, and arranging chairs for actual billionaires. But even the thought of me rubbing elbows with that level of extreme wealth drove her completely insane. Melanie stared at the photos of the Newport estate, her jealousy flaring into a blinding obsession. Her own wedding was scheduled to take place at a local mid-tier suburban country club. It was nice, but it was incredibly ordinary. Suddenly, her country club reception felt cheap and inadequate compared to a $50 million Newport mansion. She could not stand the idea that I was succeeding in my career even as a supposed servant to the elite. She hated that I was breathing the air of the ultra-wealthy while she was suffocating under the weight of her own financial lies. If she could not have the Newport estate, she was going to make sure I lost my access to it. She decided right then and there to completely ruin my career. Melanie opened a web browser and created a new, untraceable email account. She spent the next 2 hours crafting a vicious, defamatory letter designed to destroy my professional life. She claimed to be a concerned vendor who had uncovered massive financial fraud within my department. The email explicitly accused me of embezzling thousands of dollars from the media network production budget. She wrote a highly detailed, completely fabricated narrative stating that I was actively siphoning corporate funds to secretly pay for my own pathetic, low-class courthouse wedding because I was completely broke and drowning in debt. She did not hold back. She called me a liability, a thief, and a manipulative employee who was using company resources to fund a private life I could not afford. It was a masterpiece of projection, considering that was exactly what she was doing to Malik and our father. But Melanie was thorough in her malice. She did not just send the email to a generic human resources address, where it might get buried or ignored. She spent hours hunting down the direct corporate email addresses of the network executive board of directors. She found the contact information for the chief executive officer, the head of legal, and the chief financial officer. She wanted maximum destruction. She wanted a public, humiliating firing that would leave me destitute and begging for mercy. With a wicked, satisfied smile, she hit send. Melanie closed her laptop and walked downstairs to the kitchen where Deanna was nervously pacing the floor, still stressing over the restaurant disaster and the impending questions from Malik. Melanie casually poured herself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter, looking more relaxed than she had all day. "Relax, Mom," Melanie said, taking a slow sip. "I just took care of our Madeline problem." Deanna stopped pacing and looked at her suspiciously. "What did you do?" Melanie laughed, a cold, calculating sound that echoed in the quiet kitchen. "Let us just say I sent a very informative email to the executive board of her media network. They are going to audit her entire department by tomorrow morning. She has been acting so high and mighty, refusing to give up that land, acting like she is better than us. Well, she is not going to have a paycheck to fund her little arrogant attitude much longer." Deanna smiled, her eyes lighting up with malicious glee. "You got her fired, I gave them the rope." Melanie smirked. "She will hang herself with it. By Friday, Madeline will be completely unemployed, disgraced, and blacklisted from the entire industry. She will be begging us to let her move back into her old bedroom." They clinked their wine glasses together, celebrating my impending downfall, completely blind to the reality of the situation. They had absolutely no idea that the very board of directors they had just emailed answered directly to me. Later that evening, the city lights of Manhattan cast long shadows across the sleek, modern kitchen of the luxury downtown apartment Malik shared with Melanie. Malik was loosening his tie after a grueling 14-hour day in arbitration. He needed a specific blue ink pen to sign a stack of hard-copy closing documents for a high-profile client. Knowing Melanie usually kept a handful of them in her oversized designer tote bag, he walked over to the marble entryway console and reached inside the supple leather bag. His fingers bypassed her makeup pouch and brushed against the thick, stiff edges of a manila envelope. Curious and driven by the natural, ingrained instinct of a corporate litigator who spent his life dissecting paperwork, he pulled the envelope out. The flap was unsealed. He slid the thick parchment out and immediately recognized the distinct legal formatting. It was a quitclaim deed. Malik pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, scanning the dense legal jargon with a practiced, critical eye. His brow furrowed deeply as he read the names listed on the transfer. It was a drafted transfer of property rights specifically demanding that Madeline Ross surrender her 50% stake in a 10-acre Westchester commercial property over to Melanie. The document stipulated that Madeline would do this without any financial compensation whatsoever. As a lawyer, Malik knew exactly what this document implied. It was aggressive, entirely one-sided, and legally predatory. More importantly, he had never heard a single word about this Westchester land, nor had he ever expressed any desire to build a custom mansion on it, which the document explicitly stated was the intended purpose of the transfer. Melanie walked into the kitchen, her heels clicking softly against the tile. She froze instantly when she saw the document in his hands. A flash of genuine, undisguised panic crossed her face, before she quickly inhaled and masked it with a look of wounded, desperate innocence. Malik held up the paper, his voice completely calm but layered with the unmistakable professional authority he used during cross-examinations. "Melanie, what exactly is this? Why are you trying to legally corner your sister into surrendering property behind my back? And why does this document state that we need this land for our future estate? We never discussed moving to Westchester." Melanie immediately burst into tears. It was a flawless, heavily rehearsed performance. She covered her face with her hands, letting out loud theatrical sobs as she collapsed into one of the kitchen bar stools. "I was trying to protect us, Malik," she cried, her voice trembling perfectly as tears streamed down her carefully contoured cheeks. "You do not know what Madeline is really like. You only see the quiet front she puts on. She is a complete sociopath. She has been trying to sabotage my happiness and steal my future since we were little kids. That land was supposed to be mine, but she manipulated my grandfather on his deathbed to get half of it. She is completely broke, drowning in credit card debt, and she threatened to sell her half to an industrial developer just to ruin the neighborhood and spite me. I just wanted to secure a safe, beautiful future for our family before she destroys everything we are trying to build." Malik stood there, the quitclaim deed feeling incredibly heavy in his hand. He hated seeing her cry. It went against every protective instinct he had as a man. He walked over and gently wrapped his arms around her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Shh, it is okay," he murmured, comforting her instinctively while his mind raced. "We do not need her land, Melanie. We have plenty of our own resources, and I make more than enough to buy us whatever house we want. Just let it go. We do not need to stoop to aggressive legal threats against your own family." Melanie buried her face in his chest, nodding weakly, gripping his shirt. "I just love you so much," she whispered, her voice muffled against the fabric. "I am so terrified she is going to ruin our wedding and embarrass us in front of your partners." Malik held her until her breathing evened out, eventually sending her off to the master bathroom to take a warm bath and relax her nerves. But as he stood entirely alone in the quiet kitchen, staring down at the discarded legal document on the marble counter, the uneasy feeling in his gut refused to fade. His entire career was built on identifying inconsistencies, sniffing out perjury, and recognizing when a narrative was fundamentally flawed. Melanie's story was suddenly riddled with massive holes. If Madeline was a broke sociopath trying to ruin the family, why did she carry herself with such quiet, unbothered confidence? Why had she casually walked away from a massive financial demand the other day without a single second of hesitation? And why was Melanie secretly drafting legal documents, forging narratives, and putting his name on them without his knowledge or consent? The lawyer in him simply could not let it go. He needed cold, hard facts, not emotional, terror-filled narratives. Malik walked into his home office and locked the heavy mahogany door behind him. He sat down at his desk, fired up his laptop, and bypassed his usual email servers. Instead, he logged directly into the secure high-level public records and financial databases he used to vet corporate clients, investigate opposing counsel, and trace hidden assets. He decided to run a quiet routine background check on the Ross family, just to ease his own mind, and officially confirm Melanie's story about Madeline's supposed financial ruin. He started with Madeline. He typed her legal name and the basic identifying information he had gathered from the wedding invites into the search bar, fully expecting the screen to populate with a string of maxed-out credit cards, collection agency notices, and perhaps a past eviction. Instead, the database hummed for a second before generating a financial profile that made his jaw literally drop. Madeline Ross was not broke, not even close. The database showed her as the primary holding member of a massive LLC that owned multiple high-value commercial properties across the East Coast. It showed zero consumer debt, an impeccable credit score, and significant equity holdings in a major national media conglomerate. The financial profile glowing on his screen belonged to a self-made millionaire, not a desperate, jealous event coordinator. Profoundly confused and feeling a sudden sharp spike of anxiety, Malik adjusted his search parameters. If Melanie had brazenly lied to his face about Madeline being broke, what else was she lying about? He pulled up the financial records for Richard and Deanna Ross, focusing specifically on the sprawling family estate in Connecticut. It was the house Melanie always bragged about, the ultimate symbol of their old money high society status. The database processed the request cross-referencing property tax records and bank liens. Malik stared at the glowing screen, the blood running absolutely cold in his veins. The Ross family was practically bankrupt. The pristine Connecticut estate had 3 separate massive mortgages stacked against it, all of which were severely delinquent. There were massive financial liens against Richard's name from unpaid elite country club dues and maxed-out luxury credit accounts. They were drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of toxic, unmanageable debt. Malik leaned back in his leather executive chair, the horrifying reality washing over him in a sickening wave. The woman he was about to marry was not a wealthy heiress protecting him from a crazy sister. She was a complete fraud, and her entire family was a sinking ship attempting to use him as their life raft. The very next morning, the crisp autumn air of Manhattan did nothing to cool the blistering tension brewing inside the towering glass and steel headquarters of my media network. I had received an urgent, highly confidential calendar invite at 6 in the morning, requesting my immediate presence in the executive ground floor boardroom. The subject line simply read, "Emergency Financial Review." I knew exactly what it was about. As an executive producer and a 25% equity partner, I had automatic access to the flag security servers. I had already seen the anonymous defamatory email accusing me of embezzlement. I had also seen the IP address it was sent from, which directly traced back to the suburban Connecticut router of my parents' house. Melanie was not exactly a criminal mastermind. I dressed in a razor-sharp tailored white suit, grabbed my briefcase, and headed downtown, entirely unbothered by her pathetic attempt at corporate sabotage. Meanwhile, completely oblivious to the fact that their digital footprints were painfully visible to our IT department, Deanna and Melanie were treating my impending professional execution like a spectator sport. They had actually taken the early commuter train into the city, dressed in their finest mall boutique outfits, and confidently marched right into the sprawling, multi-story marble lobby of the network headquarters. The lobby was a massive, intimidating space filled with biometric security turnstiles, towering digital screens broadcasting our morning shows, and a high-end espresso bar where executives conducted informal meetings. Deanna and Melanie purchased overpriced lattes and strategically positioned themselves on a plush velvet sofa that offered a direct, unobstructed view of the main security desk and the executive boardroom glass doors. They were practically giddy with malicious anticipation. Melanie kept checking her phone, bouncing her leg up and down, whispering excitedly to Deanna about how the armed security guards were going to physically drag me out of the building. She painted a vivid picture of me crying, carrying my belongings in a pathetic little cardboard box, publicly humiliated in front of my peers. They were so absorbed in their cruel, vindictive fantasy, so busy congratulating themselves on my manufactured downfall, that they entirely failed to notice the tall, impeccably dressed figure stepping off a private elevator bank just a few yards away. It was Malik. By absolute, undeniable coincidence, Malik was in the exact same commercial tower representing a Fortune 500 client in a grueling merger negotiation on the 42nd floor. He had stepped down to the lobby espresso bar during a brief recess to clear his head. He was already running on zero sleep, his mind consumed by the horrifying financial background check he had run on the Ross family the night before. He was trying to figure out exactly how and when to confront Melanie about her massive web of lies, the fake wealth, and the mountains of toxic debt. As he waited for his black coffee, he turned around and spotted them. His fiancée and his future mother-in-law sitting in the lobby of a media conglomerate they had absolutely no business being inside, giggling like vicious schoolgirls. Malik narrowed his eyes, his sharp legal instincts flaring instantly into overdrive. He walked slowly across the expansive marble floor, his presence heavy and commanding. He stopped right in front of their velvet sofa, his tall shadow falling over them, blocking out the bright lobby lights. "Melanie," he said, his deep voice slicing cleanly through their whispered gossip. "What exactly are you doing here?" Melanie gasped, nearly dropping her hot latte onto her lap. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated panic as she stared at the man she had been actively lying to for months. "Malik," she stammered, her face turning chalk white. "What are you doing here? I thought you were locked in a closed-door deposition all day long." "I asked you a question," Melanie Malik replied, his tone stripped of all its usual warmth and affection. It was the cold, clinical, terrifying voice he used when cross-examining a hostile witness on the stand. "Why are you and your mother sitting in the lobby of a national media network headquarters on a Thursday morning?" Deanna quickly tried to jump in and run interference plastering on a fake, overly bright smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, Malik, what a wonderful surprise this is. We were just doing a little wedding shopping in the city and decided to stop in here for some coffee. The modern architecture in this building is just so stunning, we simply wanted to admire it for a few minutes before our next appointment." Malik did not even look at Deanna. He kept his piercing, unforgiving gaze locked entirely on Melanie. "You hate modern architecture," he stated flatly, "and the bridal boutiques you supposedly shop at are 40 blocks uptown. Try again. You told me last night that Madeline was a broke sociopath trying to ruin your life. Now I find you sitting in the lobby of the corporate building where she works. Are you stalking her?" "No, of course not," Melanie sputtered defensively, her perfectly manicured hands trembling so badly she had to put her coffee cup down on the table. "We are just waiting for a friend to come downstairs." "You are lying," Malik said, his voice dangerously quiet, but carrying an immense weight. "Just like you lied about the Westchester land. Just like you lied about your family finances." Melanie froze, the blood draining entirely from her face. Deanna let out a sharp gasp, realizing instantly that the polished, wealthy facade they had worked so incredibly hard to maintain was rapidly crumbling right in front of them. Malik stood tall, refusing to let them off the hook, his brilliant mind connecting the final devastating dots. He realized they were not there to shop. They were there to watch something happen. They were waiting for a show. Before Melanie could formulate another desperate, pathetic excuse, a loud, authoritative click echoed across the marble lobby. The massive frosted glass doors of the ground-floor executive boardroom swung wide open. Melanie practically snapped her neck, turning to look, a victorious, cruel smirk automatically forming on her lips, despite the intense confrontation with Malik. She was fully expecting to see me crying, stripped of my dignity, being escorted by armed security guards. Instead, I walked out of the boardroom, radiating absolute power and control. I was not holding a cardboard box. I was not in tears. I was flanked on my right by the chief executive officer of the network, and on my left by the formidable head of corporate legal. They were not escorting me out. They were actively shaking my hand, smiling with deep professional respect. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention so quickly," Madeline, the CEO, said loudly, his voice carrying easily across the cavernous lobby. "We have already dispatched our cybersecurity team to trace those false allegations back to the original sender. Attempting to defame an equity partner is a massive legal liability, and we will be pursuing full corporate litigation against whoever wrote that garbage." "Absolutely." The head of legal agreed, nodding firmly as he adjusted his glasses. "Your position here is completely beyond reproach. We will handle the trash disposal from here." I smiled warmly, adjusting my designer briefcase. "I appreciate it, gentlemen. Have a wonderful morning." I turned and began walking across the lobby, my heels clicking rhythmically against the pristine marble. I looked up and saw the three of them standing near the espresso bar. Deanna was clutching her chest as if she were having a literal heart attack. Melanie looked like she had just been struck by lightning, her jaw hanging open in sheer, unadulterated horror. She had sent the email to get a low-level employee fired only to discover she had just threatened a major equity partner with a ruthless corporate legal team at her absolute disposal. But the most satisfying reaction belonged to Malik. He stood there looking from me in my tailored suit back to his trembling, fraudulent fiancée. The confusion in his eyes had completely vanished, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. He finally understood exactly who was playing who. The CEO, completely unaware of the intense family drama unfolding just a few feet away, stopped near the center of the lobby. He turned to face me, his voice carrying easily over the low hum of the morning espresso bar crowd. He wanted to make sure this apology was as public as the threat against me had been. "Madeline, I want to formally apologize on behalf of the entire executive board," he said, his tone ringing with absolute professional deference. "The fact that someone had the audacity to send a defamatory email accusing you of financial misconduct is completely unacceptable. You are not just a valued asset to this network. You are a 25% equity partner. You practically built our unscripted division from the ground up. The board has zero tolerance for this kind of malicious cyber harassment against one of our primary shareholders." The head of legal stepped forward, adjusting his suit jacket. "We have already instructed our cyber division to pull the IP logs. The email was routed through a residential internet provider in suburban Connecticut. We will have the exact physical address pinpointed within the hour. Once we do, my team will file a massive civil suit for corporate defamation. We will not let this go quietly." "Thank you both," I replied, my voice steady and gracious. "I have full faith in our legal team to handle whoever was foolish enough to send it." I glanced over at the velvet sofa. The physical transformation of my mother and sister was genuinely something out of a medical textbook. Deanna was gripping her cheap knockoff designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were completely white. Her jaw was unhinged, her eyes darting frantically around the massive billion-dollar corporate lobby as her brain desperately tried to process the reality of what she had just heard. The daughter she had spent years treating like an impoverished failure, the daughter she had tried to extort for a $15,000 floral bill, was a primary shareholder of a national media conglomerate. Melanie looked as though she was going to physically vomit. All the blood had rushed from her face, leaving her skin a sickly ashen gray. She was trembling violently, her eyes locked on the head of legal. She knew exactly what a residential IP address in suburban Connecticut meant. She knew they were going to trace that email directly to her childhood bedroom. Her brilliant, flawless plan to get me fired and ruin my life had just spectacularly backfired, turning her into the primary target of a multi-million-dollar corporate lawsuit. But it was Malik who finally broke the silence. The pieces of the puzzle had rapidly slammed together in his brilliant legal mind, forming a terrifying, undeniable picture. He took a slow, deliberate step away from Melanie, putting physical distance between himself and the woman he had planned to marry. A defamatory email, Malik said, his deep voice dropping to a terrifying quiet register. Traced to a residential router in Connecticut. He slowly turned his head to look down at Melanie. His eyes were completely devoid of the warmth he usually reserved for her. He looked at her the way he looked at a hostile witness who had just committed perjury on his stand. "Is that what you were doing on your laptop last night when you claimed you were finalizing the seating chart?" Malik demanded, his voice slicing through the lobby air like a scalpel. "Did you actually sit in my apartment, use my internet connection, and draft a defamatory corporate email against an equity partner of a national television network?" "Malik, no, please," Melanie choked out, her voice barely a high-pitched whisper. She reached out with a trembling hand, trying to grab the sleeve of his tailored suit. "You do not understand. It was just a joke. I was just angry. I did not know she owned the company. I thought she was just an event coordinator." Malik slapped her hand away. The sharp echoing smack made Deanna flinch violently. "You thought she was an event coordinator," Malik repeated, his tone dripping with sheer unadulterated disgust. "So your brilliant solution to a personal family grievance was to anonymously accuse an innocent employee of federal embezzlement. Do you have any idea what you have just done? I am a senior partner at a corporate litigation firm. Melanie, my entire career, my entire professional reputation is built on integrity. And my fiancé is sitting in the lobby of the building she just cyber-attacked, waiting to watch her sister get escorted out by security like some kind of sick, twisted spectator sport." Malik ran a hand over his face, letting out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You lied to me about the Westchester land. You lied to me about her being broke. And last night I ran a background check on your family estate in Connecticut. 3 delinquent mortgages, Melanie. Your father is practically bankrupt. Your entire life is a heavily financed illusion, and you almost dragged my immaculate legal reputation right down into the mud with you." Deanna tried to stand up, her fake maternal instinct finally kicking in. "Malik, please, you are overreacting. We can fix this. We can explain everything." "Do not speak to me," Malik snapped, holding up a hand to instantly silence her. "I am done listening to the two of you." I stood a few feet away, watching the absolute destruction of the golden child illusion. I did not feel the need to shout. I did not feel the need to cause a massive scene or hurl insults at them. Their own actions had finally caught up to them, and the consequences were playing out flawlessly. I adjusted the strap of my briefcase and began walking toward the main exit. As I passed the velvet sofa, I paused right beside Melanie. She was hyperventilating now, tears streaming down her face, her chest heaving as she realized she had just lost the wealthy lawyer husband she had banked her entire future on. I leaned down slightly, my face perfectly calm, my voice a soft, chilling whisper meant only for her ears. "You aimed at the wrong target, Melanie. See you on my wedding day." I straightened up and walked straight through the heavy glass revolving doors, stepping out into the bright, crisp Manhattan morning. I did not look back. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. A shattered illusion, a terrified mother, and a golden child who was finally going to have to pay the absolute maximum price for a lifetime of cruelty. The car ride back to their downtown apartment was completely silent. It was not the comfortable, easy silence of a couple in love. It was the suffocating, heavy quiet of a storm about to break. Malik kept his eyes glued to the road, his grip on the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. Melanie sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, frantically chewing on her thumbnail as she tried to calculate her next move. She knew she had been caught, but her narcissistic brain was already spinning a new web, trying to find a way to make herself the victim. As soon as Malik unlocked the door to their apartment and pushed it open, the illusion officially shattered. He did not bother turning on the main living room lights. He threw his keys onto the marble console, took off his suit jacket, and tossed it over the back of a chair. He turned to face her, his expression harder than she had ever seen it. "Sit down," Melanie Malik commanded. His voice was not loud, but it carried the absolute non-negotiable authority of a judge in a courtroom. Melanie tried to put on a brave face. She crossed her arms and stood her ground near the kitchen island. I do not want to sit down, Malik. You are acting like I am some kind of criminal. You are letting Madeline get exactly what she wants. She wants to ruin us. Malik let out a harsh, humorless laugh. Ruin us? Madeline did not draft a fraudulent quitclaim deed for land that is already zoned for commercial development. Madeline did not lie to my face for 6 months about her career or her finances. And Madeline certainly did not send a defamatory email from a residential IP address trying to get an innocent person fired. You did that. All of it. Now I'm going to ask you one time, and if you lie to me again, I am walking out that door and not coming back. What is the absolute truth about your family finances? Melanie swallowed hard. Her throat felt like sandpaper. My family is wealthy, Malik. You have been to the Connecticut estate. You have seen how we live. Stop. Malik snapped, his voice finally raising to a volume that made her jump. Stop insulting my intelligence. I ran a background check last night. Your pristine family estate has 3 delinquent mortgages stacked against it. Your father has massive financial liens from unpaid country club dues. You are completely broke, Melanie. Your entire life is heavily financed by toxic debt. You targeted me because you thought my income could bail out your sinking family. Panic surged through Melanie, hot and blinding. Instead of feeling remorse, she felt cornered, and like any cornered animal, she lashed out. She decided to double down on the one thing she knew how to do, attack her sister. You think she is so perfect? Melanie screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the high ceilings of the apartment. You think Madeline is some brilliant self-made millionaire? She is a fraud, Malik. There is absolutely no way she earned a 25% equity stake in a national television network on her own. She is not that smart. She is not that talented. She obviously slept her way to the top. She probably seduced the CEO or some rich board member to get that title. She is a manipulative, disgusting liar, and you are letting her tear us apart. Malik stared at her, completely revolted. As a man who had spent his entire life working relentlessly to break through barriers and build a pristine reputation based on merit, her words turned his stomach. He was disgusted by her lack of evidence, her toxic entitlement, and her willingness to completely destroy another woman's character just to save her own skin. You have absolutely zero proof of that. Malik said, his voice dripping with pure disdain. You are throwing baseless, vile accusations at a woman who just proved her corporate worth in front of a lobby full of executives. You are so consumed by jealousy and your own massive inferiority complex that you cannot even fathom someone else achieving success through hard work. You would rather believe she slept her way to the top than admit she is simply better and smarter than you. Malik, I am your fiancé. Melanie cried, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. I am the woman you are marrying on Saturday. You are supposed to take my side. I take the side of the truth, Melanie Malik replied coldly. And the truth is, I do not even know who you are anymore. I thought I was marrying a kind, generous woman. Instead, I am engaged to a vindictive, deceitful brat who spends her time plotting how to steal from her own blood. He turned around and walked straight into the master bedroom. Melanie stood frozen in the kitchen, her heart pounding as she listened to the sounds coming from the other room. Zippers opening, drawers sliding. Malik was packing a bag. She ran into the bedroom doorway, her fake bravado completely crumbling. What are you doing? Malik, please do not do this. The wedding is in 2 days. The caterers are paid. The guests are flying in. You cannot just leave. Watch me, Malik said, grabbing a sleek leather overnight duffel and stuffing a few custom suits inside. I am going to stay at a hotel near the firm. I need space, and I seriously need to reconsider this entire marriage. Do not call my phone. I will reach out when I am ready to talk. He brushed past her, entirely ignoring her hysterical sobbing, and walked out the front door. The heavy click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. Melanie collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. Her perfect plan was entirely destroyed. Her wealthy, handsome groom had just walked out on her 48 hours before they were supposed to walk down the aisle. Desperate, she grabbed her phone from her purse and dialed Deanna's number. Deanna answered on the first ring, her voice tight with anxiety from the disastrous morning in the lobby. Mom, he left. Melanie wailed, completely losing her composure. Malik packed a bag and left. He knows about the debt. He knows about the house. He said he is reconsidering the wedding. Take a deep breath, Melanie, Deanna commanded sharply, slipping right back into her role as the master manipulator. Do not panic. Men get cold feet all the time, especially when there is unexpected family drama. He is just overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. He called me a deceitful brat mom. He is staying at a hotel. Listen to me, Deanna insisted, her tone dripping with toxic confidence. Malik is a man who cares about public image and reputation. He is a prominent lawyer. He is not going to cancel a massive public wedding 2 days before the event and humiliate himself in front of all his senior partners and colleagues. You just need to push forward. But what if he does not show up? Melanie sniffled. He will show up, Deanna assured her. Once he sees the venue, the flowers, the dress, and how lavish everything is, he will calm down. He will remember how beautiful you are and how perfect you look together. We will put on the ultimate show. Once he sees our high society wedding, he will completely forget all about Madeline and her stupid corporate title. Just keep your chin up and get ready for Saturday. We are not letting that selfish sister of yours win. Melanie wiped her eyes, taking a shuddering breath. Deanna's words acted like a twisted, comforting balm to her narcissistic ego. She convinced herself that her mother was right. The wedding would fix everything. She just had to put on the dress and smile. She had no idea that Saturday was going to be the absolute worst day of her entire life. The eve of the weddings arrived, bringing a sharp, undeniable contrast between my reality and the crumbling illusion my family was desperately trying to hold together. I was standing on the sprawling stone terrace of the $50 million Newport estate. The salty ocean breeze swept off the Rhode Island coast, rustling the leaves of the ancient oak trees lining the manicured lawns. Below me, dozens of network production crew members were meticulously setting up camera cranes, testing lighting rigs, and arranging thousands of imported white orchids. Preston stood beside me, his arm wrapped securely around my waist, watching our vision come to life. Tomorrow we would be married in front of Governor's Wall Street titans and millions of viewers across the country. It was peaceful. It was perfect. Exactly 150 miles away, the atmosphere in suburban Connecticut was absolute chaos. Melanie was hosting her rehearsal dinner at a mid-tier local country club. It was a venue that tried very hard to look luxurious with its faded floral carpets and outdated brass chandeliers. But the real panic was happening behind the scenes. Malik was nowhere to be found. True to his word, he had checked into a city hotel and was completely ignoring Melanie and her endless stream of frantic text messages. He had agreed to show up the next day only because canceling last minute would cause a massive professional scandal for his firm, but he had made it very clear that he was treating the ceremony as a legal obligation rather than a celebration of love. But Malik's absence was the least of their immediate problems. The toxic debt Deanna and Richard had built their lives upon had finally reached its breaking point. As I stood on my terrace watching the sunset, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Richard calling. I almost declined it, but a morbid sense of curiosity made me swipe to answer. I wanted to hear exactly how deep their desperation ran. Madeline, Richard barked the second I answered, completely bypassing any form of a greeting. His voice was frantic, layered with a heavy, thick panic that he could barely disguise. I need you to wire $50,000 to my bank account right now. This is not a request. I raised an eyebrow, stepping away from Preston and walking toward the edge of the stone balustrade. $50,000, I repeated slowly, letting the sheer audacity of the demand hang in the air. That is a very specific number, Richard. Did the bank finally foreclose on your 3 secret mortgages? Or did your country club threaten to publicly revoke your membership? Do not play games with me, he hissed, his breathing ragged over the speaker. Melanie's caterer just called. The deposit checks your mother wrote bounced. The florist is threatening to pull the centerpieces, and the venue manager is demanding a cashier check by midnight, or they are locking the doors tomorrow morning. Malik is already furious with her over some misunderstanding about an email, and if he walks into a reception hall with no food and no flowers, he is going to cancel the entire thing. You have money. We know you have it. You need to fix this. I stood there listening to the crashing waves of the Atlantic Ocean, genuinely marveling at the utter delusion of the man on the other end of the line. They had spent my entire life treating me like an unwanted burden. They had drained my college fund. They had tried to scam me out of my grandfather's land. Melanie had literally attempted to destroy my career and get me fired from a network I partially owned just 48 hours ago. And now, on the eve of my own wedding, they were demanding my money to save their fraudulent social standing. You want me to pay for a wedding that I was explicitly uninvited from? I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. You want me to bail out the sister who tried to frame me for corporate embezzlement? She made a mistake. Richard shouted, the desperation morphing back into his usual aggressive authoritarian tone. She was just stressed. You are family, Madeline. You do not let family drown. You step up and you do your duty. Now call your bank and authorize the wire transfer. I am your father and I am telling you to do this. You lost the right to call yourself my father the day you stood back and let Deanna tear my wedding invitation to shreds, I replied coldly. You let her throw my life into the trash because you were too busy protecting your precious golden child. You built a house of cards on credit and lies, Richard, and now the wind is blowing. I am not giving you a single dime. You are going to face the consequences of your own financial ruin. A heavy, vibrating silence fell over the line. When Richard finally spoke again, his voice was a guttural snarl of pure hatred. You are a disgusting, selfish brat. I should have never let your mother keep you. You are completely dead to me. Do you hear me? You are dead to this family. You will rot before I ever speak to you again. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. The little girl who used to cry in her bedroom, begging for her parents to love her, was long gone. In her place stood a woman who owned her own empire. I understand, I said, my voice smooth and lethal. But before you completely write me off, Richard, do me one small favor. Check your television tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. Turn it to the national broadcast channel. I will make sure you get a front row seat to exactly what you threw away. I ended the call, cutting off whatever vile insult he was about to scream next. I blocked his number, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and turned back to Preston. Tomorrow I was going to burn their entire illusion to the ground, and I was going to do it while wearing diamonds. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and crystal clear. I woke up in the sprawling oceanfront master suite of the Newport estate to the sound of waves crashing gently against the private beach below. There was no rushing, no panic, and absolutely no screaming. Room service had already delivered a silver tray of fresh fruit and vintage champagne. As I sat on the plush velvet chaise lounge sipping from a crystal flute, a team of top-tier network producers quietly moved around the room. A female audio tech gently secured a tiny state-of-the-art microphone to the inner lining of my silk robe. Across the room, hanging against the floor-to-ceiling windows, was my custom $250,000 wedding gown. The morning sunlight caught the thousands of hand-sewn diamonds woven into the bodice, throwing spectacular prisms of light across the walls. Everything was executed with flawless, quiet precision. Meanwhile, the atmosphere inside the cramped bridal dressing room at the Connecticut Country Club was completely suffocating. The air conditioning was barely functioning, leaving the small room smelling strongly of nervous sweat and cheap hairspray. Melanie was in the middle of a full-blown meltdown. She was sitting in a rickety plastic chair screaming at a freelance makeup artist who was actively zipping up her cosmetic case. The artist had just informed Melanie that she would not apply a single drop of foundation until her final payment was processed, and the digital transfer Deanna had promised had just bounced for insufficient funds. "You are ruining my day!" Melanie shrieked, her face blotchy and red. "You cannot just leave me half-finished. I am marrying a senior corporate partner. Do you know who he is? He will sue you for breach of contract." The makeup artist simply slung her bag over her shoulder and rolled her eyes. "Sue me with what money your mother just tried to pay me with a declined credit card. Have a nice life." The door slammed shut behind her, leaving Melanie sobbing hysterically into her hands. Deanna was pacing frantically behind her, wearing an outdated mother of the bride dress that clearly still had the department store tags tucked inside the collar so she could return it on Monday. She tried to soothe Melanie, promising that she would do her makeup herself, but the panic in Deanna's eyes was undeniable. To make matters worse, Malik had barely spoken a single word to anyone. He had arrived in a separate black car, checked in with the venue manager, and immediately sequestered himself in the groom's suite. He looked less like a man preparing for the happiest day of his life, and more like a lawyer stepping into a hostile deposition. Downstairs in the main reception lounge, the situation was rapidly deteriorating from a private family disaster into a very public social humiliation. Malik had invited over 50 of his high-profile colleagues. These were federal judges, senior litigation partners, and wealthy corporate clients who were accustomed to absolute luxury. Melanie had spent months bragging to Malik and his friends about her old money family, promising a lavish high society event. Instead, the esteemed guests arrived to find a peeling country club lobby, faded carpets, and a cocktail hour that consisted of cheap well liquor and rubbery frozen chicken appetizers. The sharp, analytical minds of the legal elite immediately began connecting the dots. They stood in small clusters, nursing their warm drinks, and casting highly skeptical glances toward Richard, who was sweating profusely in a poorly fitted rented tuxedo. The final nail in this coffin happened right at the main lobby bar. A prominent Superior Court judge, a close mentor to Malik, walked up to order a premium scotch. The bartender shook his head apologetically, explaining that the open bar had officially been converted to a cash-only bar. When the judge asked why, the bartender did not lower his voice at all. He loudly explained that the father of the bride had just tried to put the open bar tab on his credit card, and the machine had aggressively declined the transaction 3 times in a row. The Whisper network ignited instantly. High-profile lawyers exchanged knowing, pitying looks. The rumors spread like wildfire across the lounge. The Ross family was completely broke. The extravagant wealth Melanie had flaunted was a total sham. Malik was marrying into a financially toxic, fraudulent family. The murmurs grew louder, echoing off the low ceilings of the country club, completely destroying the carefully crafted illusion Deanna and Richard had spent decades building. Standing near the entrance of the ballroom, Deanna heard the whispers. She saw the wealthy guests side-eyeing her husband. Panic gripped her throat like a vice. She needed to distract them. She needed to instantly remind these snobby lawyers of her daughter's beauty and the profound love between Melanie and Malik. She remembered that she had brought a USB drive loaded with a heavily edited professional slideshow of Melanie and Malik's engagement photos. Deanna rushed over to the corner of the lounge where 2 massive 80-inch flat-screen televisions were mounted on the wood-paneled walls. She grabbed the venue remote control from a nearby table, her hands shaking violently. She pointed the remote at the screens and pressed the power button frantically, trying to switch the input to the USB port to play the slideshow and drown out the humiliating gossip. But the country club televisions were part of a closed-circuit system managed by the venue bar. Deanna pressed the input button repeatedly, but the system was firmly locked. The screens flared to life in brilliant high definition, the volume automatically blasting through the lounge surround sound speakers. Instead of a romantic slideshow of Melanie, the screens were locked onto the most watched national broadcast channel in the country. The entire room of whispering lawyers and judges suddenly fell dead silent as a familiar dramatic orchestral overture filled the air and a massive gleaming network logo flashed across the twin screens. The booming, professionally modulated voice of a famous national television anchor echoed from the surround sound speakers, completely filling the faded country club lounge. "Welcome to an exclusive live television event," the anchor announced, his voice practically dripping with reverence. "Today we are bringing you unprecedented access to what industry insiders are already calling the billionaire wedding of the decade." The entire country club went completely dead silent. The hushed, pitying whispers about the Ross family and their declined credit cards vanished in an instant. Every single guest, from the federal judges to the senior litigation partners, turned their attention away from the cheap frozen appetizers and locked their eyes onto the twin screens. Deanna stood frozen in the corner, the useless venue remote slipping from her trembling, clammy hands and clattering onto the worn carpet. She was utterly paralyzed. She could not breathe. She could not move to pull the power plug from the wall. She could only stare in sheer, unadulterated horror as the broadcast unfolded. On the screen's breathtaking high-definition aerial drone shots began to play. The camera soared over the dramatic rocky coastline of Newport, Rhode Island, capturing the crashing waves of the Atlantic Ocean before sweeping over the sprawling $50 million estate. It was a visual masterpiece of extreme, untouchable wealth. The drone hovered over the private harbor, showcasing a fleet of massive, gleaming superyachts bobbing gently in the water, their decks lined with uniformed crew members. The shot then transitioned to the front gates of the mansion, where a seemingly endless procession of black armored luxury SUVs was pulling up to the grand entrance. The camera zoomed in, capturing the A-list guest list arriving in real time. The lawyers in the country club lounge began to gasp, softly pointing at the screens. They recognized the faces of powerful state governors, legendary Wall Street hedge fund managers, and globally recognized tech moguls stepping out of the vehicles. This was not just a wealthy wedding. This was a summit of the American elite, a gathering of absolute power and infinite resources. And it was playing out in spectacular color right in front of Malik's highly connected, status-obsessed colleagues. At that exact moment, the heavy wooden double doors at the back of the country club lounge swung open. Melanie stepped into the room. After her screaming match with the makeup artist, she had spent the last hour frantically applying her own foundation and mascara in the sweltering, poorly lit dressing room. She had put on her overly ruffled, generic boutique wedding dress, completely convinced that the moment she walked into the room, all the financial drama would vanish. She fully expected the crowd to turn around and erupt into cheers. She anticipated a standing ovation, breathless gasps at her beauty, and Malik staring at her with tears of absolute devotion in his eyes. She paused in the doorway, striking a practiced pose, a stiff, artificial smile plastered across her face. But nobody clapped, nobody cheered, nobody even looked at her. Melanie blinked, her fake smile faltering as a wave of profound confusion washed over her. She took a few steps forward, her cheap satin train dragging against the faded floral carpet. The room was completely silent except for the booming voice of the television anchor. Every single person in the lounge, including her own father, had their backs turned to her. They were completely mesmerized by the twin screens on the wall. Melanie scanned the crowd frantically, her eyes darting around until she finally spotted Malik. He was standing near the cash-only bar holding a glass of club soda. He was not looking at the doorway. He was not waiting for his bride. His sharp, intense eyes were glued to the televisions, his jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle feathered in his cheek. Malik, Melanie called out, her voice cracking slightly, sounding incredibly small and pathetic in the large room. He did not hear her, or if he did, he actively chose to ignore her. One of his senior law partners, a man who had successfully argued cases in front of the Supreme Court, was standing right next to Malik, shaking his head in absolute awe at the screen. Melanie felt a cold, terrifying knot of dread form in the pit of her stomach. She walked further into the room, her heavy dress rustling loudly, until she had a clear, unobstructed view of the twin screens. She looked up, desperate to see what had completely hijacked the most important moment of her entire life. On the television, the dramatic orchestral music swelled to a triumphant crescendo. The camera angles shifted from the aerial drone to a highly cinematic ground-level shot inside the Newport estate. The elite crowd of billionaires and politicians collectively stood up from their gilded chairs, turning their attention toward the grand, sweeping marble staircase of the mansion. "We are now getting our very first look at the bride," the television anchor announced, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "She is an absolute powerhouse in the media industry, a woman who has built a formidable corporate empire entirely on her own terms. Today, she unites that empire with the Beaumont family legacy." Melanie stopped breathing. Her heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. The blood rushed out of her head so fast she felt dizzy. The heavy wooden doors at the top of the marble staircase on the screen slowly opened. The high-definition camera panned up, focusing perfectly on the figure stepping into the Rhode Island sunlight. It was me. I stood at the top of the stairs looking down at the spectacular crowd gathered for my wedding. I was not wearing the cheap off-the-rack dress Melanie had envisioned. I was wearing a custom haute couture masterpiece. The gown was a breathtaking cascade of imported silk and French lace intricately threaded with $250,000 worth of real, flawless diamonds. The sunlight caught the precious stones, wrapping me in a radiant, blinding halo of pure light. My hair was styled in an elegant, timeless sweep, and my makeup was absolutely flawless, highlighting the calm, serene confidence of a woman who held the world in the palm of her hand. I looked like absolute royalty. A collective audible gasp ripped through the country club lounge. "Wait a minute," one of Malik's colleagues said loudly, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. "Is that Madeline Ross, the sister?" Melanie let out a choked, horrified sob. She stared at the screen, watching me glide effortlessly down the marble steps in a dress that cost more than the entire Connecticut house her parents were about to lose to the bank. The grand illusion was dead. The truth was broadcasting live to millions of people, and Melanie was finally forced to stand in the shadows of my blinding, undeniable success. On the television screens, the orchestral music swelled as I began my descent down the grand marble staircase. At the bottom, waiting for me under a breathtaking archway of imported white orchids and cascading greenery, stood Preston. He looked incredibly handsome in his custom-tailored tuxedo, his eyes locked onto mine with a look of absolute devotion, respect, and pride. As I reached the final step, he stepped forward and gently took my hand. The high-definition camera zoomed in on our intertwined fingers, capturing the flawless multi-carat diamond engagement ring, catching the late afternoon Rhode Island sunlight. The television anchor's voice returned, narrating the historic moment with practiced, enthusiastic reverence. "We are witnessing a truly monumental union today," the anchor announced to the millions of viewers tuning in across the country. The drone footage on the screen panned across the crowd, showing the absolute elite of American society sitting in rapt attention. Preston Beaumont, the sole heir to the Beaumont venture capital and commercial real estate empire, is taking the hand of Madeline Ross. For those who might not be familiar with her background, Madeline is not just a stunning bride. She is a powerhouse media mogul in her own right. As a founding partner and executive producer at one of the largest media conglomerates in the world, she has built an independent fortune from the ground up. This is a merger of two absolute titans of industry. Back in the suffocating heat of the country club lounge, those words landed like physical blows. Melanie let out an ear-piercing shriek that made several nearby guests physically recoil in horror. "Turn it off!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, her face contorting into an ugly, blotchy mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "Turn the televisions off right now!" She lunged toward the corner where Deanna had been standing frantically searching for the remote control. But the remote had slipped completely under a heavy velvet armchair when Deanna dropped it perfectly hidden from view. Melanie began violently kicking at the heavy furniture, her cheap satin dress tangling around her legs as she scrambled like a feral animal. "Somebody pull the plug!" she yelled at the venue staff, who were now standing near the bar, looking completely bewildered and highly amused by the spectacle. A young waiter rushed over to the screens to help, but the televisions were professionally mounted, flush against the expensive wood-paneled walls. The heavy-duty power cables were routed directly through the drywall and into a locked utility closet situated directly behind the main bar. There were no exposed cords to pull. There were no physical buttons to press. The broadcast was securely locked into the venue master audiovisual system, and the general manager who held the security keys was currently out in the parking lot, aggressively dealing with Richard regarding the bounced catering checks. The television anchor continued his glowing commentary, completely oblivious to the utter devastation he was causing in a suburban Connecticut country club. "What makes Madeline's story so incredibly inspiring is her absolute independence," the anchor said warmly, as the camera tracked our slow, elegant walk down the aisle. She stepped away from her suburban roots at the age of 18 and entirely self-funded her education and her subsequent business ventures. She is the ultimate self-made woman. Her relentless drive and her fierce independence are exactly what caught the eye of the Beaumont family. The broadcast suddenly cut to a quick, pre-recorded interview with Preston's father, a legendary billionaire investor who smiled warmly into the camera and said, "Madeline is a force of nature. We are honored to welcome a woman of such high caliber and integrity into our family. She built her empire without a single handout, and she embodies the exact values we hold dear." Every single word radiating from those speakers systematically dismantled the toxic web of lies Melanie had spent months spinning. Malik stood entirely motionless near the cash-only bar. His glass of club soda was completely forgotten in his hand. He was listening to the broadcast with the razor-sharp focus of a seasoned litigator, dissecting a hostile witness testimony on the stand. He heard the anchor explicitly confirm my media mogul status. He heard Preston's father praise my undeniable integrity and self-made wealth. He heard the absolute irrefutable proof that I was not a broke, jealous, sociopathic sister trying to ruin my family out of spite. I was a highly respected, immensely wealthy executive who had cut ties with a toxic, financially ruined family to protect my own peace and sanity. Malik slowly turned his head to look at Melanie. She was currently on her hands and knees in her wrinkled wedding dress, violently ripping at the carpet edge near the wall, sobbing hysterically as she tried to find a non-existent power switch to end her public humiliation. The sheer pathetic nature of the scene was staggering. He looked over at Richard, who was pale, sweating profusely and staring blankly at the floor. He looked at Deanna, who had backed herself entirely into a corner, hiding her face behind her trembling hands to avoid the burning, judgmental stares of the elite legal guests. The fraud was completely and spectacularly exposed. Malik realized he had not just been casually lied to. He had been actively, maliciously recruited to serve as a financial life raft for a family of desperate, delusional con artists who hated their only successful child. As the heavy realization settled over him, locking into the cold, hard logic of his brilliant legal mind, a hand gently clapped him on the shoulder. Malik turned his head to see Lawrence, one of the most senior and respected managing partners at his corporate litigation firm. Lawrence was an incredibly wealthy, principled man who valued pedigree, transparency, and honesty above absolutely all else. He was looking up at the massive television screen, adjusting his expensive wire-rimmed glasses, a look of profound confusion and intense curiosity wrinkling his forehead. Lawrence leaned in close, his deep voice cutting clearly through Melanie's ongoing hysterical screams echoing across the lounge. "Wait a minute," Lawrence said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the television screen where Preston and I were now exchanging our vows. "Is that your wife's sister? You told us she was a broke event planner struggling to make rent. Are you secretly marrying into the Beaumont family, Malik? Why on earth are we standing in this rundown country club eating frozen appetizers while your sister-in-law is hosting the billionaire wedding of the decade?" Malik stood perfectly still as Lawrence asked the question. The words hung in the stale, over-conditioned air of the country club lounge, colliding violently with the high-definition reality playing out on the twin television screens. The billionaire wedding of the decade. His sister-in-law, the woman he had been repeatedly told was a pathetic, jealous, entirely broke event planner, was currently exchanging vows with the heir to an international venture capital empire. Malik looked at Lawrence, a man who possessed the power to make or break his trajectory to senior partner at their prestigious corporate firm. Lawrence was not just asking a casual, curious question. He was evaluating Malik. He was looking at a man who was supposed to possess razor-sharp due diligence, only to find him standing in a dilapidated venue surrounded by bounced checks and declined credit cards, preparing to marry into a family of pathological liars. The sheer magnitude of the professional and personal humiliation washed over Malik in a suffocating wave. He looked around the crowded room. Dozens of federal judges, corporate executives, and elite litigators were staring directly at him, Their faces were a devastating mixture of pity, amusement, and profound professional concern. In the high-stakes legal world, reputation and judgment are the only currencies that truly matter. If a lawyer cannot even see through a cheap, fraudulent con artist operating inside his own personal life, how can a Fortune 500 company trust him to negotiate a billion-dollar merger? The Ross family had not just lied to him in private. They had actively paraded him in front of his most powerful peers as a complete and utter fool. They had weaponized his pristine, hard-earned reputation to artificially inflate their own dead social standing. Through the roaring static in his ears, Malik heard the frantic, desperate rustling of cheap satin. Melanie had finally stopped tearing at the carpet baseboards. She scrambled to her feet, her face a terrifying mask of smeared makeup, running mascara, and wild, unhinged desperation. She frantically smoothed down the front of her wrinkled dress, taking short, ragged breaths as she tried to reconstruct her shattered illusion. With millions of people watching Madeline achieve spectacular triumph on national television just a few feet away, Melanie decided her best strategy was complete and total denial. She plastered a rigid, manic smile onto her face and marched straight toward Malik. She deliberately ignored the bewildered stares of the elite guests. She ignored Lawrence, who took a discreet, cautious step back as she approached. She acted as if the catastrophic public exposure of her family and their financial ruin was nothing more than a minor, insignificant scheduling hiccup. "The ceremony is starting, Malik." Melanie chirped, her voice artificially bright and completely unhinged. She reached out and wrapped both of her hands tightly around his bicep. Her grip was like a vice, her manicured nails digging painfully into the expensive wool fabric of his custom-tailored suit. "The string quartet is playing in the main ballroom right now. We need to go. Everyone is waiting for us." She actually tried to physically drag him toward the double doors, leading to the faded floral archway they were supposed to be married under. She leaned in close, her breath hot and shallow against his neck, whispering frantically through her gritted teeth. "Fix your face, Malik. Do not do this to me in front of these people. You are embarrassing me. Walk with me to the altar right now." For a fraction of a second, Malik did absolutely nothing. He just looked down at the woman gripping his arm. He looked at the fake designer jewelry she wore, bought with credit cards her father could never pay off. He thought about the forged quitclaim deed she had drafted in secret to steal land from her own sister. He thought about the malicious, defamatory corporate email she had sent to destroy Madeline's career over pure spite. And then, with a massive surge of absolute, undeniable clarity, his temporary paralysis broke completely. Malik planted his feet firmly on the faded carpet. He did not let her pull him another inch. With a sharp, powerful, and incredibly deliberate motion, he ripped his arm entirely out of her grasp. The sudden, forceful physical rejection caused Melanie to stumble backward, her high heels catching painfully on the hem of her heavy wedding dress. "Do not ever touch me again," Malik stated. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, resonant, booming baritone that carried the chilling, absolute authority of a courtroom verdict. The entire country club lounge fell deadly silent. Even the television broadcast seemed to fade into the background noise. Melanie gasped loudly, her hands flying to her mouth. "Malik, please," she sobbed, abandoning the bright bride act and collapsing right back into the helpless victim role she knew so well. "I love you. You promised to marry me today." "I promised to marry the woman you pretended to be?" Malik replied, his words precise, measured, and highly lethal. "But that woman does not exist. You are a pathological liar, Melanie. You lied about your sister. You lied about your family finances. You tried to use my name and my legal career to steal real estate, and you tried to commit corporate sabotage just to stroke your own fragile, toxic ego. You thought you could trap me in this absolute circus of a family, and I would just quietly foot the bills to protect my public image." Malik turned his head slowly, taking in the sight of the terrified, completely cornered Ross family. Richard was visibly shaking, sweating profusely, and leaning heavily against a high-top cocktail table for physical support. Deanna looked as though she was going to faint right there on the floor, her eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately looking for an escape route that simply did not exist. Malik looked directly at Deanna and Richard. He did not lower his voice. He wanted every single judge and lawyer in the room to hear him clearly, officially, and publicly, severing himself from their toxic wreckage to salvage his own professional integrity. "Your family is a fraud," Malik stated loudly, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. He did not wait for an apology. He did not wait for an explanation or another fake tear. Malik turned his back on Melanie, turned his back on the altar, and walked straight out of the venue doors, leaving his former fiancée screaming hysterically on the floor. The heavy wooden doors of the country club lounge slammed shut behind Malik, the sound echoing like a final devastating gavel strike in a silent courtroom. For several agonizing seconds, nobody moved. The only sound in the entire room was the cheerful, polished voice of the television anchor broadcasting my spectacular wedding reception from the twin screens on the wall. Then the complete and total meltdown began. Melanie did not just cry. She regressed. Stripped of her wealthy fiancé, her fake social standing, and her carefully constructed golden child persona, she dropped to her knees and threw a full-blown hysterical tantrum right there on the faded floral carpet. She slammed her fists against the floor, her cheap satin dress bunching up around her waist as she kicked her heels wildly. She tore at her veil, ripping the plastic comb straight out of her hair, screaming at the top of her lungs. It was an ugly, visceral display of pure, unadulterated, narcissistic collapse. She shrieked that her life was over, that it was all my fault that Malik was going to come back because he had to come back. But Malik was gone, and the elite guests he had brought with him were not going to stick around for the circus. Lawrence, the senior managing partner of the litigation firm, adjusted his suit jacket and gave Richard one final look of absolute chilling disgust. He did not say a single word. He simply turned on his heel and walked toward the exit. That movement broke the spell, holding the rest of the room captive. As if responding to a silent command, the dozens of federal judges, corporate lawyers, and high society guests collectively turned their backs on the screaming bride and headed straight for the doors. Richard snapped out of his paralyzed state, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. He practically leaped across the room, throwing himself into the path of the exiting guests. "Wait, please wait," Richard begged, holding his hands up in a pathetic attempt to block the doorway. "This is just a massive misunderstanding. The caterers are just running a little late. Malik just needs a moment to cool off. We are going to serve dinner shortly. Please do not leave." Lawrence paused, looking down at Richard as if he were a particularly unpleasant stain on the carpet. "Mr. Ross Lawrence," said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register, "you are currently attempting to serve frozen appetizers on a declined credit card while your daughter throws a tantrum on the floor and your prospective son-in-law actively flees the premises. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending this is a scheduling error. Move out of my way before I have building security forcefully remove you from my path." Richard shrank back, his shoulders collapsing in utter defeat. He stepped aside and the mass exodus continued. Within 3 minutes, the lounge was completely emptied of anyone carrying an ounce of social or financial capital. The only people left were a few bewildered distant relatives and the highly agitated venue staff. The general manager of the country club marched into the room, flanked by 2 burly security guards. He completely ignored Melanie, who was still sobbing hysterically into the carpet. He walked straight up to Richard, holding a portable credit card terminal and a massive stack of unpaid invoices. The manager was furious. "The bar is closed," the manager barked, shoving the invoices into Richard's chest. "Your final 3 credit cards just declined. The caterer packed up his truck and left 10 minutes ago because your wire transfer bounced. You currently owe this venue $22,000 for the ballroom rental and the cocktail hour. You are going to produce a certified cashier check right this second, or I am calling the local police department and having you arrested for felony theft of services." Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at the invoices, his hands shaking violently. He was completely broke. He had nothing left to leverage, no secret accounts to drain, and no golden child marriage to bail him out. While Richard faced the terrifying reality of his financial destruction, Deanna was experiencing a completely different kind of psychological break. She had backed herself into the corner of the room, her eyes completely glazed over as she stared obsessively at the television screens. The broadcast had transitioned from the ceremony to the outdoor reception at the Newport estate. She watched as waiters in pristine white tuxedos carried silver trays of caviar and vintage champagne through a crowd of actual billionaires. She watched the camera pan across towering floral arrangements that cost more than her entire heavily mortgaged house. And in the center of it all, she saw me radiant and dripping in diamonds, laughing with a tech mogul while Preston kept his arms securely around my waist. Deanna's mind, completely shattered by the absolute failure of her master plan, violently snapped into a brand new, highly delusional reality. Her golden daughter had just lost a corporate lawyer, but her scapegoat daughter had just officially married into a billion-dollar empire. In Deanna's twisted, narcissistic brain, she truly believed that family ties gave her an all-access VIP pass to my newfound wealth. She convinced herself that the torn invitation and the years of emotional abuse did not matter. She was my mother, and that biological fact alone entitled her to a piece of the Beaumont fortune. She believed that if she could just get in front of the television cameras and wrap her arms around me, all the financial ruin currently suffocating them would magically disappear. Deanna's posture suddenly straightened. The panic vanished from her eyes, replaced by a manic, terrifying determination. She marched across the room, completely ignoring the venue manager shouting at her husband, and grabbed Melanie by the shoulders of her ruined wedding dress. "Get up!" Deanna hissed, digging her nails into Melanie's arms and violently hauling her off the floor. "Stop crying over a pathetic lawyer. Look at the television, Melanie. Malik is a peasant compared to the Beaumonts. Madeline is practically royalty right now." Melanie sniffled, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick black streaks. "What are you talking about? She hates us. She blocked our numbers. She will never give us anything." "She does not have a choice?" Deanna snapped, her voice rising to a frantic, commanding pitch. "We are her family. She is on live national television right now playing the perfect bride. If we show up, she has to let us in to save face. She cannot risk a public scandal in front of her billionaire in-laws. We are going to that reception, and we are going to get our cut." Deanna turned and grabbed Richard by the collar of his rented tuxedo, physically dragging him away from the furious venue manager. "We are leaving right now," she screamed. The venue manager yelled after them, threatening to call the cops, but Deanna did not care. She shoved her husband and her sobbing daughter out the side exit and practically sprinted across the dark parking lot toward Richard's leased luxury SUV. She threw open the back door and shoved Melanie inside, not caring that the cheap satin train of the wedding dress got slammed in the heavy doorframe. She ordered Richard into the driver's seat, her eyes wild and completely unhinged. "Drive," Deanna screamed, slamming her hand against the dashboard. "Get on the interstate right now." Richard's hands were shaking so badly he could barely turn the ignition. "Rhode Island is 3 hours away, Deanna. We cannot just crash a billionaire wedding. There will be security." Deanna leaned over the center console, her face completely twisted with pure, desperate greed. "Step on the gas, Richard. She is blood. She has to let us in. We will fix all of this at her reception." The leased SUV tore out of the country club parking lot, its tires squealing against the asphalt, as Richard forced the vehicle onto the highway on ramp. The 3-hour drive from suburban Connecticut to Newport, Rhode Island, was a suffocating nightmare of frantic, delusional energy. The interior of the car smelled like burnt rubber and Melanie's nervous sweat. She was slumped in the back seat, her cheap satin wedding dress hopelessly wrinkled and stained from the country club carpet, her face streaked with ruined makeup. She was practically catatonic, staring blankly out the window as the dark highway lines blurred past. In the passenger seat, Deanna was operating in a state of pure, unhinged mania. Her thumbs flew across her smartphone screen as she fired off text message after text message to my number. I had already blocked her, but she had absolutely no idea her desperate pleas were bouncing into a digital void. She narrated her texts out loud, crafting a completely fabricated reality where she was simply a loving, misunderstood mother. "Maddie, darling, there has been a terrible misunderstanding," Deanna muttered frantically, her eyes glued to the glowing screen. "We are on our way to celebrate with you. I was misled by Richard and Melanie. They told me you did not want us there, but I know in my heart you need your mother on your special day. I just want my two beautiful daughters together. We are family, Maddie. Family forgives. She hit send, completely ignoring the fact that less than an hour ago she had demanded I wire them $50,000 to save Melanie's sham of a wedding. Her brain had entirely compartmentalized their financial ruin and the humiliating exposure at the country club. The only thing that mattered now was getting inside that $50 million estate and positioning herself in front of the television cameras as the proud matriarch of the Beaumont family. Richard gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. "Deanna, this is insane," he rasped, his voice trembling with sheer panic. "We cannot just show up uninvited to a billionaire wedding. The police will arrest us. I have no money for bail. We do not even have money for gas to get back home. Shut up and drive faster." Deanna snapped, her voice cracking like a whip in the confined space. "She is my daughter. They cannot arrest the mother of the bride. Once I get a microphone in my face, Madeline will be forced to play along. She will not risk a public scandal damaging her precious corporate reputation in front of her new husband." By the time they crossed the Newport Bridge, the sun was beginning to dip low on the horizon, casting a golden hour glow over the spectacular coastal mansions. They navigated the winding cliffside roads until they finally reached the Beaumont estate. The sheer scale of the operation immediately became apparent. The main road leading to the property was lined with state police cruisers, flashing their blue and red lights to manage the heavy traffic of black luxury vehicles. A massive perimeter of velvet ropes and iron barricades had been erected to keep the aggressive swarm of paparazzi and national press reporters at bay. Flashbulbs erupted like a strobe light show in the gathering dusk as elite guests continued to arrive. Richard slammed on the brakes, bringing their leased SUV to a jerking halt just outside the main security checkpoint. He was absolutely terrified, his hands shaking so badly he could barely put the car in park. Deanna did not hesitate. She unbuckled her seatbelt and threw open the passenger door. "Come on," she ordered, reaching into the back seat and roughly grabbing Melanie by the wrist. "Get out of the car. We are going to walk right up to those cameras." Melanie stumbled out onto the cobblestone street looking like a complete deranged mess in her ruined bridal gown. The press corps, always hungry for a spectacle, instantly noticed the bizarre sight. A weeping woman in a dirty wedding dress and an older woman in a cheap department store gown marching aggressively toward the $50 million gates. The flashbulbs pivoted away from the arriving senators and hedge fund managers, firing rapidly at the Ross family. Deanna soaked in the attention, her delusional confidence surging. She plastered on a wide, manic smile and began waving frantically to the reporters behind the barricades. "I am the mother of the bride," Deanna screamed over the roar of the crowd and the idling engines. "Let us through. I am Madeline Beaumont's mother. We had a slight delay, but we are here for the reception. Make way for the bride's family." She grabbed Melanie and attempted to physically push her way through the narrow gap between the iron barricades, fully expecting the security personnel to immediately part like the Red Sea upon hearing her self-proclaimed title. She thought the flashing cameras would act as her ultimate shield, forcing everyone to cater to her demands. Instead, the response was immediate and overwhelming. As Deanna's foot crossed the threshold of the private driveway, a massive wall of men in tailored black suits materialized out of thin air. This was not the bored, underpaid venue staff they were used to bullying at the suburban country club. This was a highly trained elite private security detail, hired to protect billionaires and politicians. They moved with terrifying silent precision, instantly forming a solid human barricade blocking the towering wrought iron gates. The crowd of reporters fell completely silent, sensing the explosive shift in the atmosphere. The paparazzi lowered their voices, raising their high-definition lenses to capture the confrontation. Deanna slammed right into the chest of the lead security officer. He did not budge a single inch. He was a towering, heavily muscled man wearing a discreet earpiece and an expression of absolute, unyielding authority. He looked down at Deanna and her sobbing, disheveled daughter with cold, professional detachment. Deanna tried to push past him, her fake smile finally slipping into genuine panic. "Excuse me," she snapped, using her most entitled, demanding tone. Did you not hear what I just said to the press? I am Deanna Ross. I am the mother of the bride. You need to step aside and let us into my daughter's wedding right this instant." The head of estate security slowly raised his hand, signaling the rest of his detail to stand by. He looked directly into Deanna's eyes, fully aware that a dozen high-definition cameras were recording every single second of the interaction. The head of estate security did not blink. He stood with the immovable posture of a man who had dealt with far more dangerous threats than a hysterical woman in a cheap department store dress. He slowly reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek digital tablet. He tapped the glowing screen a few times, his face completely devoid of any emotion, before turning the device around. He held it up high, ensuring that not only Deanna and Melanie could see it, but also the dozens of high-definition lenses and boom microphones pressing against the iron barricades directly behind them. On the bright screen were three extremely clear, high-resolution photographs, one of Deanna, one of Richard, and one of Melanie. Stamped across all three of their faces in bold, glowing red letters was a single word: blacklisted. Right below that, in slightly smaller text, it read, "Deny entry under all circumstances." "I am fully aware of who you are," Mrs. Ross, the security chief, said. His voice was deep, resonant, and expertly projected. He spoke loudly enough that every single reporter and tabloid journalist within a 50-foot radius could hear him perfectly over the clicking cameras. "And because I know exactly who you are, I also know that you are explicitly barred from entering this property. You are not on the guest list. You are on a comprehensive security blacklist." A collective murmur rippled through the press corps. The journalists practically salivated. The billionaire wedding of the decade had just delivered a massive unscripted family scandal right to their front row seats. Camera shutters fired in a deafening continuous roar, capturing Deanna's face as it morphed from arrogant entitlement to sheer paralyzing mortification. Richard, who had nervously jogged up behind his wife, grabbed her elbow. "Deanna, let us go," he pleaded, his voice cracking with panic as the camera flashes blinded him. "They are recording us. We are going to be on the internet." But Deanna was too far gone. Her narcissistic reality had completely fractured, leaving behind nothing but blind, irrational desperation. She tried to slap the tablet out of the security officer's hand. "This is absurd!" Deanna shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical frequency. "This is a mistake! Madeline would never do this to her own mother. She is just overwhelmed with the planning. You need to radio up to the main house and tell her that we are here. Tell her Melanie is here in her wedding dress. She will want to see us." Melanie, suddenly realizing that millions of people might end up seeing this footage, decided to deploy her ultimate weapon. She spun around to face the wall of flashing cameras, completely abandoning her angry, demanding demeanor. In a split second, she summoned tears to her eyes, her lower lip trembling as she clutched the dirty, wrinkled bodice of her bridal gown. "Please." Melanie wept, her voice projecting perfectly toward the microphones. "My sister is being so cruel. I just had my own wedding today, and all I wanted was to come here and share this beautiful moment with her. We are family. I just want to hug my older sister on the most important day of her life. Why is she doing this to us? Why is she tearing our family apart over money?" It was a spectacular performance. For a brief second, a few of the reporters actually lowered their cameras, looking slightly sympathetic toward the crying bride who had supposedly been cast aside by her billionaire sister. Melanie sobbed louder, burying her face in her hands, waiting for the tide of public opinion to turn in her favor. She expected the security chief to feel the pressure of the press and step aside. Instead, the security chief simply lowered his tablet and looked at Melanie with a gaze so cold it could have frozen the Atlantic Ocean. He waited exactly 3 seconds for her theatrical sobbing to peak before he delivered the absolute killing blow. "Mrs. Beaumont anticipated you might try to create a public scene," the security chief stated calmly, his voice slicing cleanly through Melanie's fake cries. "She gave me a direct message to relay to you if you showed up at these gates." Melanie stopped crying instantly. She lowered her hands, a glimmer of desperate hope flashing in her eyes. She actually believed I had left a heartfelt message, a secret passcode that would grant them entry. "What is it?" Melanie asked, stepping closer to the towering guard. The security chief leaned in slightly, making sure the boom microphones picked up every single syllable. Mrs. Beaumont instructed me to tell you check the trash can for your invitation. The silence that fell over the driveway was absolute and profound. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the press corps absolutely erupted. The journalists were vicious, highly intelligent professionals. They instantly decoded the message. They realized that Madeline Beaumont had not abandoned her family out of elite snobbery. Her family had literally thrown her wedding invitation into the garbage, and now they were showing up uninvited to capitalize on her billionaire status. The sympathetic silence vanished, replaced by a ruthless barrage of shouted questions from the paparazzi. "Did you throw your daughter's invitation in the trash?" A reporter from a major tabloid screamed over the barricade. "Why are you wearing a wedding dress to your sister's wedding? Is it true your family is bankrupt? Did your groom leave you at the altar today?" Melanie backed away from the gates, her hands flying to her ears as the humiliating questions rained down on her. The cameras were pushed aggressively through the iron bars, capturing every single angle of her spectacular downfall. She had tried to play the victim on a national stage, and she had just been globally exposed as a fraud. Deanna lost the last shred of her sanity. She let out a feral, wordless scream and lunged forward, trying to physically ram her way past the security chief to reach the driveway. She swung her cheap handbag, aiming for his face. The security chief did not even flinch. He simply raised 2 fingers in the air. Instantly, 4 Rhode Island State Police troopers who had been monitoring the perimeter stepped out from the shadows of the stone pillars. They moved with swift, uncompromising authority. 2 troopers grabbed Deanna by the arms effortlessly, subduing her swinging fists and pinning her arms behind her back. A 3rd trooper placed a firm hand on Richard's chest, shoving him backward while the 4th pointed directly at the leased SUV. "You are actively trespassing on private property and assaulting private security personnel." The lead state trooper barked, his voice ringing with absolute legal authority. "You have exactly 10 seconds to get back into your vehicle and leave this peninsula, or I am placing all 3 of you under arrest for felony trespassing and disorderly conduct." Richard did not need to be told twice. Terrified of spending the night in a jail cell he could not afford to bail out of, he grabbed Melanie by the arm and practically dragged her toward the SUV. Deanna struggled against the troopers, screaming my name over and over again, but they forcefully marched her to the passenger side and shoved her inside. The paparazzi did not stop filming for a single second. They captured the Ross family being humiliated, manhandled, and escorted away by armed police. They filmed the leased SUV violently executing a 3-point turn in the narrow street, its tires screeching as it fled the scene in absolute disgrace. The golden child and the narcissistic mother had tried to crash the gates of high society, and they had been thrown out like common trash on live television. Richard drove in absolute suffocating silence. He did not stop driving until they were miles away from the glittering, wealthy coastline of Newport. The adrenaline that had fueled their disastrous attempt to crash the wedding had completely evaporated, leaving behind a cold, crushing reality. He exited the highway and pulled into the dark, muddy parking lot of an abandoned strip mall. The tires kicked up thick, wet gravel before Richard finally threw the heavy vehicle into park. He cut the engine. The silence that instantly filled the cabin was heavy and terrifying. Melanie was curled into a tight ball in the back seat, her ruined wedding dress stained with mud, sweat, and cheap venue wine. She was no longer crying or throwing tantrums. She was completely hollowed out, staring blankly at the back of the passenger seat. Her golden child illusion had been violently shattered on live television, and she had absolutely no idea how to exist in a world where she was not the center of attention. Richard rested his forehead against the steering wheel, his breathing ragged and shallow. He was a man who had finally hit the absolute bottom of a canyon he had spent 30 years digging. His credit was destroyed, his reputation was in ruins, and he was sitting in a leased vehicle he could no longer afford to fuel. But Deanna was a completely different breed of monster. Her narcissistic brain simply could not process total defeat. She sat in the passenger seat, her hands trembling uncontrollably as she pulled her smartphone from her cheap clutch. The glow of the screen illuminated her pale, drawn face in the pitch-black car. She opened her message thread with my number. She decided to abandon the angry, demanding mother routine and pivot back to the only strategy she had left in her arsenal: pity. She truly believed that if she just used the right combination of tragic words, I would revert to the desperate approval-seeking daughter I used to be. She typed frantically, her thumbs hitting the glass screen with desperate force. "Maddie, please," she wrote. "Malik left Melanie at the altar today. He walked out on her. We have absolutely no money to pay the country club for her reception. The venue manager threatened to call the police and have your father arrested. We are going to lose the house. We have nothing left. We need you. Please answer me." She hit send, staring at the screen, praying for the little delivered notification to appear. Miles away, the atmosphere could not have been more different. The reception was in full swing and absolutely flawless. A live jazz band played softly in the background, while elite guests mingled under the warm glow of thousands of string lights. I slipped away from the crowded ballroom, needing a brief moment to just breathe in the reality of the day. I stepped out onto a private stone balcony overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. The cool evening breeze caught the diamond-threaded lace of my custom gown, making the fabric shimmer in the moonlight. Preston followed me out a moment later, stepping out of the shadows. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind and rested his chin on my shoulder. We stood there together, listening to the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the cliffs, enjoying the absolute peace of our new life. I pulled my phone from the hidden silk pocket of my dress. I opened the filtered messages folder. Deanna's long, pathetic text sat right at the top of the screen. I read every single word. 10 years ago, a message like that would have sent me into a blind panic. I would have drained my savings account to save them from their own terrible choices. I would have begged for their love in exchange for my financial support. But looking at the text now, I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no sadness, no obligation, just an overwhelming sense of profound, permanent closure. I did not type out a long, emotional explanation. I did not hurl insults or list their decades of systemic abuse. I simply typed 3 words: "Too late now." I hit send, locked the screen, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I leaned back against my husband, completely releasing the past into the ocean wind. Back in the desolate, muddy parking lot, Deanna let out a sharp gasp as her phone buzzed in her hand. She stared at the 3 words glowing on her screen. Too late now. It was a digital death sentence. Her breath hitched, and a cold sweat broke out across the back of her neck. She realized with terrifying finality that the door was permanently locked. Before she could even open her mouth to tell Richard that their final bridge had been burned to ashes, a loud, sharp chime echoed through the silent car. It was Richard's phone. He slowly lifted his heavy head from the steering wheel and reached into his suit jacket pocket. He unlocked his phone, his bloodshot eyes squinting at the bright email notification that had just populated on his home screen. He opened the email. The subject line was written in stark, uncompromising capital letters: "Formal notice of foreclosure and immediate asset seizure." Richard felt the remaining blood drain completely out of his face. His hands began to shake so violently he almost dropped the device. He began reading the document out loud, his voice a hoarse, trembling whisper that cut through the dark cabin. The legal document stated that all 3 of the delinquent mortgages on their Connecticut estate had been officially acquired and consolidated by a single corporate holding company. Because the accounts were severely past due, the new holding company was invoking its legal right to accelerate the debt. They had exactly 30 days to vacate the premises before the bank seized the property entirely. Melanie sat up in the back seat, the word foreclosure finally penetrating her state of shock. "What does that mean?" She croaked, her voice raspy from hours of hysterical screaming. "Who bought the debt?" Richard scrolled down to the very bottom of the legal document, his eyes locking onto the corporate signature block. His jaw went completely slack. The phone slipped from his trembling fingers, dropping heavily onto the center console. He looked at Deanna, his eyes wide with a terror that went far beyond mere financial ruin. It is Apex Financial Holdings. Richard whispered, his voice completely devoid of life. Deanna stared back at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. Who is Apex Financial? Richard swallowed hard, feeling physically sick to his stomach, as the ultimate consequence of their actions finally crashed down upon him. It is a subsidiary firm. He choked out tears of absolute despair, finally welling in his eyes. It belongs to Beaumont Enterprises. Preston Beaumont just bought our debt. Madeline owns our house. The absolute silence that followed Richard's horrifying revelation felt like a physical weight pressing down on the cabin of the leased SUV. The reality of their situation had finally bypassed Deanna's delusions and struck her right in the chest. They did not speak another word for the rest of the night. Richard drove them back to the sprawling Connecticut estate, but as they pulled into the driveway, the towering brick colonial no longer looked like a symbol of their high society status. It looked like a massive, looming tombstone. They crept through the front door like trespassers, fully aware that the marble floors they were walking on now legally belonged to me and my husband. The sun rose on a bleak Sunday morning. The house was entirely stripped of its usual arrogant energy. Melanie was sitting at the kitchen island, wearing a silk robe over her ruined wedding dress, staring blankly at the granite countertop. At exactly 9 in the morning, the sharp sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway broke the silence. Melanie shot up from her stool, a sudden, desperate surge of hope flooding her system. She ran to the large front window and peered through the blinds. A sleek black town car had parked right near the front steps. "He came back!" Melanie gasped, her hands flying to her messy hair. "Malik is here. I knew he would not just throw it all away. Mom, Malik is here." She practically ripped the heavy oak front door open, an elaborate, tearful apology already forming on her lips. But the man standing on the front porch was not her wealthy fiancé. It was a young, sharp-looking man in a perfectly tailored navy suit, holding a thick leather briefcase. He was a junior associate from Malik's prestigious corporate litigation firm. His expression was completely blank, radiating the cold, detached professionalism of a legal executioner. Melanie Ross, the associate, asked, confirming her identity without a trace of warmth. "Yes," Melanie stammered, clutching her robe tightly around her waist. "Where is Malik? Why did he send you?" The associate opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy blue clip. He handed them directly to her. "Mr. Banks has instructed me to deliver these to you immediately. These are formal annulment papers filed first thing this morning with the emergency weekend judge. The marriage is being completely dissolved on the grounds of severe financial fraud, gross misrepresentation of character, and failure to disclose massive liabilities." Melanie stared at the papers in her hands as if they were covered in poison. "Annulment. No, we got married yesterday. We said our vows. He cannot just erase that. I am his wife. I am entitled to half of his assets. I will take him to court for spousal support." The junior associate actually let out a dry, humorless chuckle. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a second, thinner document. He flipped to the 4th page and tapped a specific paragraph with his expensive pen. "You are entitled to absolutely nothing," Ms. Ross, the associate, stated cleanly. "I suggest you read the prenuptial agreement you signed 3 months ago. You assumed the contract only protected his pre-marriage assets, but Mr. Banks is a senior corporate litigator. He embedded highly specific behavioral and financial disclosure clauses into the agreement. Because you actively lied about your family's bankruptcy, attempted to commit real estate fraud against your own sister behind his back, and engaged in malicious corporate defamation, you have triggered the gross misconduct penalty. The contract is voided entirely in his favor. You get $0, 0 assets, and 0 alimony." Mr. Banks treated this relationship like a corporate merger, and upon discovering your fraudulent accounting, he is legally liquidating the partnership. Have a good day. The associate turned on his heel, walked down the steps, and got back into the black town car, leaving Melanie standing on the porch completely paralyzed. Before the town car even reached the end of the street, a white commercial van pulled into the driveway, taking its place. The doors opened, and 3 men wearing polo shirts carrying clipboards and digital cameras stepped out. They did not knock politely. They walked straight up to the porch, bypassing a frozen Melanie, and rang the doorbell repeatedly until Richard came to the door. "Mr. Ross," the lead man asked, checking his clipboard. "We are the official property auditors representing Apex Financial Holdings. We are here to execute an immediate inventory of all fixtures and assets attached to this property under the Accelerated Debt Foreclosure Clause. We need you and your family to begin packing your personal belongings." Richard looked like he had aged 20 years overnight. He did not yell. He did not try to threaten them with a lawyer. He simply stepped aside and let the men into his home. For the next 2 hours, the Grand Connecticut estate was systematically dismantled. The auditors walked from room to room, snapping photos of the expensive chandeliers, the custom-built kitchen appliances, and the imported hardwood floors, logging everything that legally belonged to Preston's holding company. Deanna was reduced to walking out to the garage, dragging dusty cardboard boxes inside. The woman who had spent decades looking down her nose at the world was now frantically packing her cheap knockoff designer bags and whatever cheap costume jewelry she could grab before the auditors locked the doors. The facade was fully and permanently destroyed. Melanie retreated to her childhood bedroom, slamming the door to block out the sounds of the auditors, cataloging her parents' ruined life. The room where she had spent her entire life plotting my downfall, demanding the best clothes, the best cars, and all the attention, now felt like a prison cell. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands shaking violently as she picked up her smartphone. She needed to fix this. She needed to manipulate Malik one last time. She dialed his private cell phone number, the one he explicitly reserved only for her and his immediate family. She held the phone to her ear, tears streaming down her face, praying for the familiar ringtone. Instead, the line clicked, followed by a harsh robotic tone. A sterile automated carrier message played through the speaker. "The number you have reached has been disconnected or is no longer in service." Melanie dropped the phone onto the carpet. The screen went dark. She sat in the silence of her fading childhood bedroom, completely stripped of her golden child status, entirely isolated and absolutely broke. 6 months passed since the day the Connecticut estate was completely liquidated. The harsh, bitter winter melted into a bright, promising spring. The morning sun crested over the Manhattan skyline, bathing the sprawling private terrace of our penthouse in warm, golden light. I sat at a sleek glass table overlooking the lush green canopy of Central Park, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the potted olive trees Preston had bought for the balcony. Preston walked out through the sliding glass doors, dressed in a comfortable linen shirt, carrying 2 steaming cups of fresh espresso. He set one down in front of me and kissed the top of my head before taking the seat across from mine. He picked up his tablet to review the morning market reports, while I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the absolute unbroken tranquility of my life. The flat-screen television mounted on the stone wall of the terrace was tuned to a major financial news network playing at a low ambient volume. I was only half paying attention until a familiar name flashed across the bottom ticker tape. I picked up the remote and unmuted the television. The news anchor was broadcasting live from the steps of a federal courthouse. Standing right behind the microphones, looking sharper and more commanding than ever, was Malik Banks. He was surrounded by a team of junior associates and a very relieved-looking corporate client. The anchor enthusiastically announced that Malik had just secured a landmark victory in a massive high-stakes antitrust lawsuit, successfully defending a major technology firm. The settlement was unprecedented, and the anchor noted that the victory had officially secured Malik a promotion to senior managing partner at his prestigious litigation firm. On the screen, Malik stepped up to the podium to answer a few questions from the press. He did not look like a man who had narrowly escaped a disastrous, fraudulent marriage just 6 months prior. He looked unburdened, focused, and entirely in his element. He answered the reporters with his signature calm, clinical precision, a confident smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He had cut the toxic dead weight from his life with surgical precision, and because he refused to let my family drag him down into their financial ruin, he was absolutely thriving. I smiled, raising my espresso cup toward the television screen in a silent toast to his success. Good for you, Malik, I murmured softly. Preston glanced up from his tablet, following my gaze to the television. He let out a low, appreciative whistle. That was a nearly impossible case to win. The man is a brilliant litigator. He dodged a massive bullet with your sister. He did, I agreed, taking a slow sip of my coffee, and he knew exactly when to walk away. I turned my attention back to the stunning view of the city. I had not spoken a single word to my parents or my sister since the night of my wedding. The silence they left behind was not heavy or sad. It was the most beautiful, liberating sound I had ever experienced. Through the quiet efficiency of our corporate legal team, I knew exactly what had happened to the Ross family. The foreclosure on their beloved Connecticut estate had been swift, merciless, and completely legal. Stripped of their home, their credit, and their social standing, Richard and Deanna had been forced to pack whatever belongings the bank did not seize and move into a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a working-class town they used to actively mock. Richard had been forced to take a humiliating low-level administrative job just to keep the lights on. Deanna, the woman who used to boast about her elite country club memberships, was now working the cash register at a local pharmacy, forced to smile at the very people she used to consider beneath her. As for Melanie, the golden child had finally crashed into the harsh reality of the real world. Without my money to steal, without our parents' credit cards to max out, and without a wealthy lawyer to finance her delusions, she had nothing left but her own non-existent work ethic. She was working a minimum-wage retail job at a suburban shopping mall, having pawned off all her fake designer bags months ago to pay for basic groceries. They had tried to reach out, of course. Desperation makes people incredibly persistent. There were voicemails, emails, and even a pathetic handwritten letter sent to my corporate office begging for forgiveness and financial assistance. I did not read them. I did not listen to them. I simply handed them over to my legal team, who promptly issued ironclad cease and desist orders. The boundaries were set in stone, reinforced by the highest levels of corporate security. Sitting on my terrace, holding my husband's hand, I reflected on the bizarre, twisted concept of family. Society constantly drills into our heads that blood is thicker than water. We are taught to endure endless abuse, to turn the other cheek, and to constantly forgive those who share our DNA simply because we share a last name. We are conditioned to believe that setting boundaries with toxic parents or manipulative siblings is a selfish, unforgivable act. But blood can be toxic, and toxic roots will completely poison the soil, preventing you from ever growing into the person you are meant to be. I did not have to raise my voice to destroy my abusers. I did not have to plot an elaborate, malicious revenge scheme. I did not have to scream, cry, or stoop to their level of deceit. All I had to do was stand firmly in my own truth, protect the empire I had built, and completely remove my safety net from their lives. I just let them choke on their own toxicity and their own endless lies. They dug their own graves with their greed and their arrogance. I simply stopped handing them the shovel. Before I end this story, I want to say something to anyone watching who might be trapped in a similar situation. If you are the scapegoat of your family, if you are the one constantly belittled, drained, and made to feel like your success is an insult to their failures, hear me now. You do not owe your abusers your future. You do not owe them your hard-earned money, your peace of mind, or your presence at their table. Walking away from family is one of the hardest things you will ever do, but it is also the most necessary step toward your own survival. You have to be willing to cut off the dead, rotting branches of your family tree so that you can finally bloom. You deserve to build a life surrounded by people who celebrate your victories, not people who secretly plot your downfall. Do not ever apologize for protecting your peace. Thank you so much for watching and for letting me share my journey with you. If my story resonated with you, or if you have successfully walked away from a toxic family dynamic, let me know in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more stories of survival and success, and remember, your worth is not defined by the people who failed to love you. It is defined by the incredible life you build after you leave them behind. Stay strong, and I will see you in the next video.